in education with peer instruction. Tom Petit paved the way beautifully for my talk yesterday by talking about peer instruction and concept test. But 7 years ago, I decided I would make a fresh start and, in a sense, shove everything I'd done in my career at Harvard in education and ask myself the question, if I were to design the best possible educational experience for my students who are not physics majors, they are engineering majors, pre-meds, people who are not taking physics because they want to learn physics, they're taking physics because they have to take physics. If I were to do that, what would it look like? Because essentially peer instruction, the reason I developed peer instruction, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in just a second, was simply a way to fix a problem in my class, namely that my students weren't really learning. I was not really starting with a blank slate. It was, in a sense, taking something that's broken and putting a Band-Aid over it to make it a little bit better. And I wanted to ask myself, if I were to start completely from scratch, without any baggage, without, thinking about, how do you best learn in a given learning space? No, I actually even designed the learning space from scratch for this particular course. You see a picture from that course on the screen here. And during that time, I so happened to be reading a book that I mentioned earlier on day one when Alan November was online. He wrote this book, Who Owns the Learning? I think it's a beautiful title. Think about it. Who is it who owns the learning in a typical classroom? I think more often than not, it's the instructor who owns it rather than the students. I hope that Alan on Friday will talk a little bit about this because I think it's a very important subject. And what really got me in this book was not just the title, but the preface of the book. In the preface of the book, he describes something that happened to him when he started his teaching career in a high school not very far from here, Lexington High School, which is a public high school, in the early 80s. You may remember the early 80s was the emergence of the PC. Apple was the Macintosh, IBM was the PC. And Lexington High School, being in a relatively affluent suburb of Boston, was one of the very first high schools to have a computer lab in a time that nobody really knew what to do with a computer lab. And Alan was in charge of that computer lab. And he recounts that on a weekend morning, he got a call from the Lexington police, I think it was, that there had been a break-in the computer classroom in his high school, in his computer lab. And would he please come to punish the perpetrator? So he drives from his home in Marblehead to Lexington, which is like about a half-hour drive, arrives at the high school, sees the windows of the computer classroom, none are broken, goes inside the high school. The door has not been forced open. He opens the door. All of the computers are still there. None is missing. There is just one strange thing. There's a student sitting at one of the computers. So he walks up to the student and he says, "Gary, what are you doing here?" And Gary looks up at him and says, "I want to learn how to program the computer." And that's when he realized that if somebody wants to learn, they'll do anything. They'll break the law. You can't stop them from learning. And in a sense, we are all born learners. When we're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, you, me, our students, everybody around us, don't stop asking why. We were wired to want to understand how the world functions. It's a basic need of the human brain. We're wired, in a sense, we're all wired to be scientists, whether you want it or not. I mean, every single person is wired to want to explain how things work. It's a basic survival mechanism in a sense. In a sense, it's a sad fact that education beats this innate curiosity out of us. And by the time you get your students in your classes, and maybe it's not education. I mean, I don't mean education as the K-12 system. I mean education in general, including society and the education that we get outside of the classroom. By the time we get the students in our classes, you and yours, me and mine, it's no longer about the why, about the how. It's about give me the answer so I can pass the test. And that innate curiosity is gone. So I was thinking, as I was designing this new class that I wanted to teach, is there a way to sort of get my students to break into my class for physics? Can you somehow design an educational environment that creates an ownership of learning physics? And it became very quickly clear to me that that would not be as easy as the computer. I mean, as we all know, technology can be addictive. So I realized pretty quickly that I had to invent some kind of a Trojan horse and hide the physics inside the Trojan horse. And the Trojan horse that I used was nothing really new. It's sort of a merger of two existing pedagogies. Team-based learning to create a social responsibility for the learning, and project-based learning to create an intrinsic motivation for learning. I realized that in all these years that I taught pre-meds and engineers, even after introducing peer instruction, at the beginning of the year, I would essentially tell my students, I mean, not that I literally told that to them, but essentially I would tell them, here is my book, learn it, it's good for you. Because as a physicist, obviously we're kind of biased towards our own discipline, and I probably don't need much time to convince you, probably no time to convince you that the type of skills you learn in physics are good for anybody who wants to be an engineer, a doctor, a politician, whatever. The type of reasoning skills you learn are useful. But put yourselves in the shoes of a pre-medical student, somebody who wants to go to medical school. You're taking a lot of fun biology courses, but you're told by your concentration and by the medical schools who are going to evaluate your application, you must take physics in order to get into medical school. So you're taking this course, you might not really be excited, you're probably not excited, you've been frustrated by the AP test you took before. And now you come into the class of Eric Mazur, and the first thing he says is, trust me, physics is good for you. It'll help you with your career. I mean, I don't think that would convince me if I were in their shoes. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to put the content aside. I'm going to put the book aside. And rather than telling them, learn physics, it's good for you, I'm going to tell them, we're going to work on some really exciting projects. And at first sight, the project doesn't even have, an obvious physics smell to it. And I try to add to the project a component of empathy or social good. And by talking about this component of empathy or social good, often the students get really excited about the project. And once they're really excited about the project, I tell them, here's my book. You may want to have a look at it. It may help you with your project. So the content, and I think this is a really important point, the content of the course, rather than being a goal in its own right, becomes a means or a vehicle, if you want, to accomplish a goal that's much more meaningful in the minds of the students. And I found, I won't be able to talk too much about the projects and so on, although I'll be happy to stick around during lunch and other times to talk to you more about it. And I'll give you some resources at the end that point you to more details. So the projects are sort of the glue that holds the entire course together. There's one project each month, 6 projects for the entire year, 3 in the fall, 3 in the semester. The team is to form, as I said before, a social responsibility for the learning. I assign people, and I'll talk a little bit about team-based learning, and I'll make you experience team-based learning, but we won't be able to do it completely. Again, I'll give you a resource later on if you're interested in more detail. It's not just group work. There are very specific criteria for the teams and also for the design of the curriculum that works well for teams. One huge mistake to make is to assign a curriculum designed for individuals to teams. Because let's say you have 4 people in a team. That's what we're doing today. By the way, if you're wondering what that number is in front of your name, that's your team assignment for a little exercise or 2 little exercises that we'll do during my presentation here. But let's say you have 4 people on a team, which we have today too, and you give a curriculum designed for individuals to that team. Sarah, who is on that team, is the best student in the class. She aces all the tests. Now she gets that assignment, which is a team assignment. And she looks at it and she thinks, I can do this. Paul and Eric and Catherine look at it and they say, well, I'm not sure I can do this, but I'm sure that Sarah can. And we're all too happy to let Sarah do most of the work. And Sarah, we don't learn very much because she's doing the work. And Sarah is annoyed that we get to ride her coattails without putting in the same effort as she does. So one of the first requirements in any type of meaningful team assignment is to make the assignment significantly harder so that no single individual can ace that. That's a very important rule, I think, for any type of meaningful group work or teamwork. You have to make it hard enough so that no single individual can ace it. And that's a problem, especially at my institution, where students become suicidal if they get an A-, because they have come, to Harvard by always excelling at everything, by always getting an A, by always being at the front of their class. And if they get anything that is not, stellar, they become completely depressed. They have not learned to cope with failure. Well, I'm sorry, that's not how society works. And we have to do a better job really preparing our students to deal with failures and setback. We have to see failure not as an endpoint in its own right, but as a stepping stone to greater success. And we have to build in room for improvement. So that, for me, in my class at Harvard, that has meant and still means a lot of hand-holding. I have to keep reminding my students, look, if there's no room for improvement, you're not going to learn. And also we have to adjust the assessment to this approach. I am all in favor of going to a more mastery-based evaluation rather than numerical grades, which I don't think mean very much. If you're interested in my views on assessment, you can go to YouTube and there's a talk called Assessment, the Silent Killer of Learning, because I think that through our assessment, we essentially force students in looking at ways to satisfy the assessment, which are not necessarily in line with our learning goals. But I don't have time to really spend much time about it. Again, happy to have a conversation about this later. So that course that I designed 6 or 7 years ago has no lectures and no exams, and it's project-based. And there are a number of activities that I will describe later on. But first, I want to go back in time to when I started as a professor at Harvard. And I remind you of what I said the very first day. I never intended to be a professor. I never wanted to be a professor. My father was a professor of physics. My mother was teaching art history at the university where I enrolled. And I thought, I'm going to be doing something useful in my life. I'm going to industry. Life worked out very differently. But when I started teaching at Harvard, now 36 years ago, my God, time flies. I never asked myself, how am I going to teach? In fact, the very first time that I really asked myself that question was 7 years ago when I designed this new course. I never asked myself how to teach. It was just perfectly clear to me. I was going to do to my students what my instructors had done to me. I think we all tend to do that unconsciously, right? To project our own experiences onto the world around us. I had learned physics by sitting in a class, listening to lectures. Therefore, I was going to lecture to my students. This is a picture of me as an assistant professor a long time ago at Harvard. It's a very old picture. It was taken BC, before computers. You can see I'm using an overhead projector with plastic slides on which you could write or print something out. Now, as I said, we all tend to do that. And I was asked to teach a course that no one in my department wanted to teach, physics for these pre-meds. This was at that time a purely pre-med class. Now, in my own self-defense, I'd like to point out that probably the people who taught me when I was a student made exactly the same assumption, hidden assumption, when they started teaching. They had been students sitting in a lecture, and therefore, when they started teaching, they lectured. And same, one generation further back, and generation after generation after generation. I mean, I guess everybody has been making that same assumption. I learned it in the lecture, therefore, I'm going to lecture, all the way back to this guy here. This is actually an illustration from an illuminated manuscript from the 15th century, 14 something, I think just around the time that Gutenberg invented the printing press. And it represents a scene from the 11th century or the 12th century, I forgot exactly, at the University of Bologna. This is King Henry VIII of Germany giving a lecture, guest lecture, at the University of Bologna. And, there's an uncanny resemblance between this picture and the picture I showed you before of me lecturing. I can't claim I was the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire like he was, but I mean, look at it. He's standing in front, the center of attention. The students in the front row pay close attention, are taking notes. They look a little bit more bored in the second row. And if you go all the way in the back, these two people are having a conversation with each other, clearly not paying attention at all. And then there's this guy here in the front. I don't know if he's cringing in agony or fast asleep. I mean, the resemblance is amazing. We're no longer wearing these clothes, except at graduation, I guess, to remind ourselves that, we're steeped in medieval traditions. But by and large, I think it's fair to say that very little has changed in the educational approach for close to over a millennium. The invention of the book has not much changed. In fact, we call lectures lectures, and because they started with reading notes, the word lecture comes from the Latin verb to read. And in fact, there's an academic degree, an academic rank in the UK called lecturer, a person who reads. So this predates the invention of the book because that was the only way of transferring information from one generation to the next. Now, why did I stick to this? I stuck to it for many, many years for the simple reason that I got feedback that said, Eric, you're doing a great job. What is the feedback that we receive? Well, one is the feedback from our students, and students at the end of the semester actually gave me really high ratings for my lecture. I'm sure you have that everywhere, that there's an end of semester evaluation where students give you a numerical ranking. Well, most of my colleagues didn't want to teach this course because typically pre-meds are not very kind to physicists, and their scores would, drive them close to the edge of suicide, but not so for me. I got, 4.8 out of 5 or 4.5 out of 5. I got really high scores year after year. So that was one criteria. And the other one was that I could give these students some pretty complicated problems I wasn't sure I would do well on an exam. And by and large, they did well. So they liked my lectures, they did well on the exam problems. Obviously, I was doing the right thing. In fact, very quickly, I started to believe that I was the world's best physics teacher. After all, my colleagues weren't able to get high scores and still have their students do well on the exam. Well, it was a very pleasant feeling to, feel that I was the world's best physics teacher, but it turned out to be a complete illusion, a complete house of cards. I mean, nothing could have been further from the truth. As a matter of fact, I was a very lousy teacher if I had measured it by the amount of learning that took place in my course. Now, I can tell you the whole story, but I'm not going to do that. There's plenty of recordings of my confessions of a converted lecturer online. And if you want to know the details of what made me change, then please watch one of those YouTube videos. Instead, I'm going to do something very different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a very short lecture on a subject that you're probably familiar with even. And then I'm going to give you a test. And then we'll see. Okay? So those are the instructions just to prepare you. And the subject that I've chosen to lecture on, which will be a very short lecture, by the way, no more than maybe 5 minutes, is what might well be your very favorite subject, namely, or your student's very favorite subject, namely Archimedes Principle. Now, you might not have dealt with Archimedes Principle in a while, so let me briefly read the definition of Archimedes Principle as it's given in a typical physics textbook. I forgot which one I copied. Here is one way of phrasing Archimedes Principles. An object submerged either fully or partially in a fluid experiences an upward buoyant force, the magnitude of which is equal to the magnitude of the force of gravity exerted on the fluid displaced by the object. That's Archimedes' principle. By the way, Archimedes was a Greek who lived in Syracuse, and he lived during a time that there was a big problem with counterfeit coins, which were supposed to be made from golds, but some people took, a non-precious metal and then coated it with a thin layer of gold, so they didn't really have the value that they should have. And one day, Archimedes was said to have been in the bathtub and noticed that as he put his body in the bathtub, the level of the water went up, which gave him the idea of Archimedes' principle, which we'll discuss in just a second in more detail, and a way of actually solving the problems of the counterfeiting of gold coins. And he's said to have been so excited that he jumped out of the bathtub and ran through the streets of Syracuse naked, running "Eureka, Eureka," which is Greek for "I found it, I found it." So this definition is really a mouthful of words. So let's actually break that down a little bit. Especially there is this statement: the fluid, the volume of fluid displaced by the object. So let me explain what it is. Consider a boat that is floating in a body of water. The fluid displaced by the by the object that is floating here is essentially the amount of water below the water line. So whatever is within this little dot line here, that's the volume of displaced fluid. And what Archimedes essentially says that the weight of this displayed water is equal to the weight of the boat, right? I mean, the water that's around the hull of the ship, which is the water outside of this dotted line, is pushing to hold up the water that's inside this dotted line exactly the same way as this ship. Therefore, these two forces, the upward forces have to be the same. Therefore, the downward forces due to gravity have to be the same as well. So that's the crux of Archimedes' principle. It's really beautifully simple. I haven't explained to you yet how to do the things with counterfeit coins, but we won't get to that. But that's really all you need to know in order to answer the test I'm going to give you. So are there any questions? Let me open up the chat so I can see if there are any questions, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. There's a great cartoon version of this story. I'd love to see that. No questions? Thank you so much. You know, I knew I was a brilliant lecturer, you know, and you've just reaffirmed my feeling that I give very, very clear lectures. And maybe that's actually one of the problems with a lecture. Let's see, because we'll be able to tell by actually giving you a test. So thank you for sharing that cartoon. I'm going to close the chat again so I don't get distracted here. But this is what we're going to do. I'm going to point you to a platform. I could have used this many different platforms, but I'm going to use one that I use in my class because we're going to use it for the two-stage exam that I'm going to give you at the end of my talk, so that you get the experience of the two-stage test as well. Although, you know, when I do this in the classroom, if you were in person, I would not use any technology at all. I would ask you to test, and then I would ask you to answer by putting your hand on your chest, giving me the answer you think it is. This way, everybody can vote at the same time, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5. You can have questions with up to 5 choices. And the big benefit of doing this way is that students who are sitting behind cannot see what others vote. So you can all vote at the same time, 1, 2, or 3. You can also use flashcards, but you don't even need flashcards. You can just use the technology called hands. And everybody votes at the same time. So it's not how many of you have won. Nobody's won. I'm going to keep my hand down. Right? Otherwise, people are like sheep. They follow each other. This way, everybody votes at the same time. And I tell my students, if you do not put your hand on your chest, I'm going to point at you, ask you to stand up, and tell the entire room what you voted. So they very quickly put their hand on their chest and vote. So, but we're using it. We can't do that here easily because, you know, there are just too many video screens. So we're going to use this platform. So go to this URL. I'm going to put it in the chat. Maybe someone can put it in chat for me. It points you to Learning Catalytics, a demo account. So enter the info. You can enter nonsense info. You don't have to put your real email there. And then join session 407 96710. I think I have a dummy question running there now. I have to go there myself too. Hang on. There. I got the right screen now. Ooh, but I need to move it. Here we go. 57 are on. I'm going to give you a few more minutes. And I am so happy. 98% of you is excited to be here today. I am too. We have one person who is a we'll see. We'll try to see if we can change that person. So get on. I'm going to leave the instructions on the screen, but I'm going to ask you the question. It's a one test question. And the question is the following. So the instructions are still at the bottom. And for info, you can enter anything you want. You don't have to give away your real email. Otherwise, Pearson may haunt you, which you don't want to do. So enter any info you want. So here we go. This is the situation. A boat carrying a large boulder is floating on a small pond. The boulder is thrown overboard and sinks to the bottom of the pond. So it's no longer floating in the boat, but it's at the bottom as shown in the light gray. And the question is, what happens to the level of the water with respect to the edge of the pond? Will the level of the water have gone up? Will it have gone down? Or will it remain the same? So take a minute to think about this question and then enter your answer. And if you already answered, I see 33 people have answered. And we have A's, B's, and C's. If you've already answered, then ask yourself, if I meet somebody who gives an answer that's different from me, how am I going to convince that person that I am right and he or she is wrong? Thirty more seconds. 20 more seconds. Okay, so if you have not yet made up your mind, and most people have voted, but not everybody. So for those of you who have not yet made up your mind, don't worry. Pick a choice, but don't worry. Nothing depends on the answer you give. Your salary will not be affected. Your promotion chances. This is completely a low stakes test. Okay, but what I want you to do is I want you to pick a choice so that when you're going to go in the breakout room in a second and meet the other members of your team, you at least have a choice to defend. Okay, so here's what I was going to do. I'm going to, I think everybody has voted now. So I'm going to deliver this question again to you. I don't want you to answer it now. I want you to go into the breakout room. You'll meet the other members of your team, and you'll need to do something with your team later in this talk too. You're gonna meet the other members of your team. And I want you, if you don't know them, very quickly introduce yourself, but then take a quick poll about who answered what. And then have the people who have given different answers defend their choices, and then re-enter your answer into Learning Catalytics. And I'll make an announcement for people to do that. So I'm going to ask Sarah to put us now into the breakout rooms, and be sure to talk about which is the right response. And then once you've made up your mind what the right response is, please re-answer the question a second time. So Sarah, please put us in the breakout room. All right. Sarah?
Sorry, it'll take a moment. Sorry.
Okay.
Doing it now though.
Just click open rooms. I think I see you did a great job with the.
Sorry, and I have to do them one at a time. Maybe I should have queued it up already.
Well, the other thing is you can just do random assignments now then, because we don't need the real teams yet.
Sorry.
Oh, you still need to put people in the breakout rooms?
No, I'm done with that. I just have to.
So just click open rooms.
Well, I have to assign them to the room. I'm sorry. This is going to take a moment.
Okay. Okay. Bear with me. Meanwhile, since you're still separated from each other, go through your argument. You may even want to take a little note about how your argument is going to work, because you'll discover one thing: even if you're completely convinced of your answer, you will find that it may take considerable effort to convince somebody who has another answer. And that's what I want you to do. I don't want you to talk to somebody who has the same answer or try to convince somebody who has the same answer. And also, I can tell you, the majority of people have the wrong answer for this question. So don't go by, oh, most people have given this answer, this must be the correct answer, because the majority answer is wrong.
Eric, while we're waiting for the groups, we do have a couple of questions. Is it okay if we jump in?
Yeah.
So
And Sarah, interrupt when you have the breakout rooms, because I don't want to lose momentum here. So let me know when you have people in the breakout rooms. Isa.
Yeah, first in our queue is Michael McConnell. Could you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question?
I wasn't exactly clear on how to vote. Could you say how we were supposed to vote again? Or is this just a vote we keep in our head?
Oh, do you have this platform in front of you? Learning Catalytics? Did you do this?
Okay, I'll have to do that.
Yeah, so you go to this URL, then you enter whatever info you want, doesn't matter really. And then you join session 407-96710.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. Next question. Isa? You're muted.
That is
it?
the only raised hand that I see now.
Okay. Sarah, are we done with the assignment of the breakout rooms?
Please give me another 30 seconds.
Okay, I'm timing it. So let's take another question about what I've said so far.
Question? John.
Yes. Go ahead, John.
I haven't been using Zoom too much. My school has been using Google Classroom. Breakout rooms, we should get shunted into them, or do we have to manually put ourselves into the breakout room ourselves?
With Zoom, you can set that as a preference. I have made it so that you go into the room by yourself. You can leave the room if you want, and then go back into it later if you want. But the transfer to the rooms is going to be automatic, and should be any second now, assuming Sarah has put people into the rooms.
Almost there.
No pressure, Sarah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I've got.
By the way, sorry about all the multiple links for that Archimedes cartoon. I finally did find, though, the actual author. So if you scroll through the comments, you'll see. I finally ran them.
I'm going to look at it while you are debating in the breakout rooms. Okay, Sarah, give me the green light.
Yes, okay, we're ready. So I click open all rooms.
Open the breakout room, talk to each other, and then vote when you have the answer. You don't need to agree with each other. So click open rooms.
I have.
Okay, good. So now that you have everybody in rooms, that's great. I'm going to reclaim hosts so I can open them myself next time, and so I can do the broadcasting.
My apologies, Eric. I didn't realize I was supposed to queue them up in there. That was my missing part.
That's
so I had
okay.
them assigned, but I didn't have them in the rooms ready to go. So
No
now
worries.
I understand that. Now I understand that. Sorry. So I've got, let's see if I have anyone left.
We have 9 people who are unassigned.
Yeah, okay, they must have just come on. So
Dan McIsaac, so which room shall I put him in? Greg Morrison.
Can you see, the last room only had 1 person, I think.
And there's a couple in there?
There are a couple that are coming back.
Or they're not in there yet. Give me a second. I will handle it from here. Breakout rooms. Here we go. Okay, so
Dan needs to be in 27, I believe.
Yeah.
And Greg.
Then I'm going to put
Morrison
Greg
also
in 27. Dan McIsaac also in 27. Tom Petit into
So I
23.
think Lamberto came back from 27 because he was the only one in there, perhaps.
Yeah, I put them back. I'm going to rename Dan McIsaac to 27, Dan McIsaac. Rename. I'm going to rename Greg Morrison, 27, Greg Morrison. And I'm going to rename, that's it, right?
And then
Why are they still here? And
yeah,
not in the
know.
right rooms? So 27 is kind of, well, there are at least 3 people. Okay, no,
Yeah.
there's 3 people there now.
I don't know
So
why
what
those
about
people came back.
24? Gergana and Pete's iPhone. No, iPhones can't go.
Oh, okay.
Why? And what is the Maya Gardarova is also has not joined. Maya, are you there? I see Maya is in this room. So, and Gergana, it seems that the Bulgarians have trouble.
Okay. Oof, I'm sorry about the snafu on that. I understand it now, though.
Yeah, iPhones can't go. I know that. But Gergana and Maya, I don't know why they're here.
Could they be on iPhones or a phone?
No,
No.
no,
It would say.
they have both video and, but they're not even talking. I'm trying to unmute them and they're not unmuted. Maya, Gergana. Okay. Okay, I'm going to broadcast a message. It's too bad that Maya
Yeah.
and Gergana. Yeah, well, that's okay. Morgan must just have joined. Hello, Morgan. I'm going to put Morgan in breakout room 24.
Yeah.
Morgan, unassigned, breakout room 24, there. Okay. Let's see how many votes we have. Did I broadcast a message? Did you see that?
Be sure to. Yeah.
Morgan is back here for some reason. Sanjay is back here. So Sanjay, I'm going to assign also to 23. Sanjay, did you just join or where's Morgan? Paul.
Paul Nugent as well.
Okay, 23. Can you rename the rest? You're able to do that, right?
To 20. To what number? To 23?
Yeah, let's see.
No, I can't.
Know. You can't.
Well, I need to be co-host.
Okay, so I'm going to let you, so take into account that Gergana and Maya, so why don't we, that Gergana and Maya are not going into rooms and are not hearing us, so don't assign them and assign the others. Welcome back. I guess people are there, so I'm going to close the rooms.
Did you make me co-host, Eric?
I'm going to make you host again.
Okay.
And you need to make me co-host then. This way you can do the breakout room assignments. Okay?
Yep, I don't see it yet.
No, I mean, I closed the room, so everybody's coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're still the host.
I don't see, I see me as just a participant now.
Here, there. Good.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome back. I hope you had a good discussion going. And And, I popped in only into one breakout room, but it was great to see how lively the discussion was. You got all fired up. I bet that many of you by now have forgotten that my purpose here today is not at all to talk about Archimedes Principle. In fact, Archimedes Principle doesn't even matter because we're here to really discuss the education. The whole question doesn't matter, nor does the answer to the question matter, because in a sense, I've already made my point. Imagine that I'd given the same little lecture to you or to my students or to anybody. And then instead of asking you the question, I would have said, let's now apply this to a boat with a rock in it floating on a pond. I mean, you would have been sleeping through this whole exercise, the lecture plus the application to the question. And the thing that I find really amazing is how easy it is to reawake the innate curiosity of the human mind by changing a story or telling into questioning, right? I mean, as I said before, small children are interested about these things or anything else or how the universe works, and that gets turned off. The good news is, by taking our teaching and doing it through questioning, we can incredibly easily turn that innate curiosity back on. Now, I presume you do want to know what the right answer is, but before I tell you the answer, let's quickly analyze what happened. And in a sense, Tom Petit in his talk yesterday already touched on some of this. I had you think about the question. Then I had you make a commitment. I said to those of you who did not have an answer, just vote. It won't really have any impact on your evaluation, your career, or whatever. So you made a commitment. And after you'd made a commitment, I put you into rooms where you had to externalize your answer. And the one room where I popped in, it was very interesting to see that it was no longer about the answer. It was about how you get to the answer, right? In a sense, this process brings the thinking back into the classroom. It's not about what do you have A? Oh, I'm going to use A too. No, it's about why is it A? The path to the answer becomes more important than the answer itself. And that's really what is important in education. So you move away from the answer or the fact and you focused on the reasoning. But the most important point is, you became emotionally invested in the learning process, because if I were to tell you now, I'm not going to tell you what the answer is, you'd be screaming in the chat, what is the answer? Even though, as I said, I'm not here to talk to you about Archimedes Principle. I'm here to talk to you about teaching. So you have to, though, before I can tell you the answer, vote a second time. 51 out of 97 people have done it, but I would like everybody to go back to the platform and indicate what you now believe to be the right answer. So I'm going to give you 10 more seconds to register what you now believe to be the right answer. Okay. So, I thought that I gave a pretty darn clear lecture about Archimedes Principle. And so did you, because very few, well, none of you actually asked questions. Only 1/3, no, less than 1/3, 31% of you got the right answer the first time before you discussed it with your neighbors. The correct answer is, I'm here sitting very far away from you. I can feel the suspense. It's just amazing, The chat has gone silent here. The right answer, isn't it just great how you can get people excited about something like a boat floating in a lake? And trust me, if you can do this with Archimedes Principle, you can do it with anything, right? I mean, you can do it with statistics, you can do it with all kinds of subjects that even you don't find fascinating. Okay, let me not keep you in suspense any longer. The correct answer is I need a drum roll here, number 3. And you know what? Let me show you the results. I'm going to show them to you on your platform, so you'll see them there. First time, most people thought B was the correct answer. It's going to be the same. And after discussion, 71%, that's pretty darn good. You know, you did a much better job teaching each other, 40%, than I did myself. And that's because, you know, when you have the wrong way of thinking about it, you don't suffer from the curse of knowledge that I suffer from, because I've thought about this question so much that to me it's completely obvious. Now, again, you're probably thinking only about Archimedes Principle. I really want to go back to education, but let me spend a minute to close the loop here and give you the explanation, right? Remember, what matters is the amount of displaced water. So when we take this rock out of the boat, what will happen to the level of the water in the pond? So imagine you have the boat there, you take the rock out. What happens to the level of the water as you take the rock out and lift it up? Will it go up, down? It will go, can people point on the video so I can see it? It will go down. Correct, yes, because you know the rock in the boat pushes the boat down. So as you take the rock out, it doesn't push as much on the water, and therefore the level of the water will go down. So now the rock is out, the boat is floating more high up, and the level of the water is up. Now, if we put the rock in the boat, sorry, the rock in the water, pardon me, what will happen to the level of the water? It will go back up. So how do we know whether it goes back up more than it went down or less? Well, for that, we need to get to Archimedes' principle. Remember that what matters is the amount of displaced water. So when it's floating in the boat, the amount of displaced water has to be equal to the weight of the rock. Well, otherwise, it wouldn't float. The amount of water has to be equal so that amount of water weighs the same as the rock. How much water is displaced when it's in the water? When it's in the water, it's just the volume of the rock. But we know that rock is denser than water. So therefore, the weight of the rock is a bigger volume of water than the volume of the rock. Maybe that doesn't clinch it completely, but think about this. Think about this. Imagine that it's not a boulder, it's a pea. Tiny, I don't have a pea here or anything that looks like a pea, or a marble. It's a little marble, but that marble is made from neutron star material. It's incredibly heavy, right? So the boat is floating on the lake. We take the marble, we put it in the boat. It pushes the boat down. Let's hope it still remains floating. The water level goes up. Now we lift it out of the boat. The boat goes up, the water level goes down because nothing is pushing on the boat. So we all agree the water level is very much lower. Now we take that marble and we hold it over the edge of the boat and we drop it in the water. What's happening to the level of the water? Not much, nothing, because the volume of that marble is almost nothing. And therefore the level of the water will have gone down. You won't forget this. So back for a moment to this whole little exercise, because there are 2 points I want to emphasize, which Tom already mentioned in his talk. One is my clear lecture on Archimedes' Principle wasn't that clear, because if it had really been clear and if it really would have transferred knowledge rather than just information, you would have been able to answer the question. And we often tend to think that the act of lecturing transfers knowledge. No, it transfers information. But the interesting thing is, as you can see on the Learning Analytics platform, the discussion promoted information, promoted aha moments. So when I first discovered this, which was quite a long time ago, I started to realize that my lecturing was really focusing on just one small step in education, namely the information transfer. The actual sense making, the aha moments were not occurring in my class, nor were they occurring that much outside of the class. In a traditional approach to teaching, this takes place in class. And then the sense making is really left to the students on their own whenever. Some of it might happen in the class, but as so much data shows, most of it does not. So back in 1991, when I first realized that, I actually gave a precursor of the force concept inventory that you heard about yesterday to my students, and discovered that my students didn't even have the concept of force internalized at the end of the semester. That was like, you know, a slap in my face. And that's when I realized that what I really should focus on as a teacher was the sense making, not the information transfer. Gutenberg solved this problem. Oops, pardon me. Gutenberg solved this problem a long time ago, and now we live in an information age. I should really help my students make sense of the information rather than just transferring the information. So I decided then to flip this around. I didn't call it flipping at that time. I call it inverting the classroom, so that the information transfer was before class, and then in class I would focus through questioning, like we just did, on the sense making. So through what I would call peer instruction. So I completely switched my teaching to teaching by questioning. I don't talk like I do to you now, very little. I ask a question, I have the student think, I poll them individually, and you don't need technology for that. Although online you would need technology, but there are plenty of free platforms to do that. I have students discuss in groups, and then I repoll them, and then I either end with an explanation from myself or from one of my students, and this cycle repeats until class time is up. And the aha moments take place during this discussion. That's when the sense making actually occurs. Well, if you go to Google Scholar, you can find, you know, something like 10,000 papers in many different disciplines and at many different levels, from elementary to higher education, that show data proving that this approach gives higher learning gains. In my own class, I was able to triple the learning gain. Triple. So this is not a 10 or 20% increase. No, it's a 200% increase, from like 25 to over 75% normalized learning gain. And studies such as a study done at Carnegie Mellon show better retention, right? Because if you have this aha moment, in fact, I think it was one of my students who pointed it out. Once you know it, once you understand it, you know it for life. It's not like you've just memorized it to pass the test. And yes, you may forget the facts, but you learn to trust your reasoning. There was this great talk yesterday about self-efficacy. It actually raises your self-efficacy because you know you can do it. It's not just, you know, you remember it. And you may think, does this only work in physics? Does this only work with questions that have right or wrong answers? No, and that's the beauty of it. It works with anything because it brings the reasoning back in the classroom. Think of a question like this. You're a triage nurse in a pediatric urgent care clinic, and the following patients are waiting. A 3-year-old female with a fever of unknown origin and a temperature of 40 centigrade who is riding a tricycle in the waiting room. A 6-week-old term male baby, chief complaint is fussy breastfeeding, temperature of 38.6. A 14-year-old male with a history of epilepsy who had a seizure at home lasting 5 minutes about half an hour ago. Who would you triage first? There's not a right answer here. And in fact, I would argue even in physics, there's not always a right answer, because the right answer might be predicated on a hidden assumption. So the great thing is this brings the argument. You would have the same animated discussion in the breakout rooms as you had just a moment ago. Okay. So many of you may think, okay, we've eliminated the transfer of information in the classroom. How do we effectively do that outside the classroom? And I had really not thought about this until I started designing that class that I mentioned to you at the beginning of my talk. until I wanted to really, truly create a sense of ownership with my students. And that's when I sat down and I said, how can I get my students to take this first step seriously? And then suddenly it hit me. I'd done all kinds of things. I tried just-in-time teaching, quizzes, reading quizzes. But you know, students just find minimum ways of doing it, whatever they need to do in order to pass the quiz so that they can pretend to have done the information transfer in a meaningful way. And then 5 years ago or 6 years ago, it suddenly hit me. Of course, you know, the solution was so simple. It had been staring me in the face all those years, and I just not thought about it. You see, I'd worked hard on making the classroom a more social interaction. I'd never thought about making the out of class component a more social interaction. So we developed a social learning platform called Perusal, which is free. We now have something, I looked this morning, we have 660,000 students around the world using the platform. It's free. You can upload material to it, either in video or in text, both. It used to be only text, but now it's video and text. And, or you can even have your school district get a license on the textbook and put the textbook in the platform. So students can log in through their LMS or through a social media platform, whatever they want. It can be integrated with Blackboard, Moodle, Desire to Learn, you name it. I use it through Canvas, so my students log on through Canvas. Still, many still connect their social networks so that they can find friends online. And once you're on, it's either, it looks like an e-reader or a video viewer. With one little twist, you can see who else is online in your classroom. And if you read something or hear something or see something that you have a question about, you can highlight it, which opens a chat window, which looks very much like the chat window on your smartphone or on Facebook. And once you type something in the chat book and hit return, the highlight sticks, and other people who are reading the book or viewing the video either synchronously or asynchronously can see that there is an annotation there, a chat, the beginning of a chat. So after a while, the page will get marked up. There'll be highlights left and right. And in the video, as you're watching the video, bubbles will pop up. And you can actually click on the bubble or the highlight, and it pops up a transcript of the chat. Let me make this a little bit larger. Here is one student who says, you know, at midnight on October 20th, I don't understand how this combination affect our blah, 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 blah. Half an hour later, 12:38 a.m., another student who's in session SB says, I think you may be able to think about the direction separately, blah, 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 blah. And then 2 days later, third student said, this is a great question. To further elaborate on it, blah, 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 blah. In a sense, it's like an asynchronous peer instruction of students telling each other, helping each other parse the information that is delivered to them. So, you know, one way to get students to participate is the social interaction, which gives them an intrinsic motivation. Another is that we have a machine learning analysis of both the content of the annotation as well as their engagement with the platform, which is integrated with the learning management system and which tells you as an instructor exactly how much every student gets engaged with this platform. So you'll have a pretty good sense of the engagement, but it gets even better than that. You see, in a sense, this discourse between the students is for you as the instructor a window into their brains. You can see what is going on in the discussions. And I have to tell you, when we developed this platform, I was so eager to see what they all wrote. So I kept clicking and clicking and clicking all the highlights. And I went, oh, wow, that's what they're thinking. I had no idea what was going on in the brains of my students when they were reading a text or watching a lecture, you know, because they get hung up on points that I, you know, don't even pay attention to. So my first instinct was to jump in the discussion, which is a bad idea because this should be the students' discussion, not yours, because as soon as you jump in, they're going to expect you to answer all of their questions. So I would urge you, if you adopt this platform, hands off. But I realized very quickly that the points that the students raised in the chat would be perfect for a discussion in the classroom. So we actually found a way in Perusal to connect the pre-class and the in-class activity. So, you know, rather than reading all of the annotations, you can click on a button and you get a report of the main points of confusion of the reading. This is from a class in Florida, in Orlando, where the students were reading a chapter on magnetism. I think this was Knight's book. The algorithm says that the three main points of confusion are the right-hand rule, the direction of the magnetic field, and the Earth's magnetic field. Here's one student who writes, why is it that the magnetic, I guess, field points away from the North Pole of the Earth and towards the South Pole? When on the previous page it stated the direction of the magnetic field is the direction that the North Pole of the compass needle points. Very good question. Knight does not actually say that the North Pole is a magnetic South Pole. So this was a really, really good question. So perfect question for in class. You know, you can say, well, one of you asked this question, cut and paste, and you project the question. And they'll go, wow, he actually read all of our annotations. Well, I read 9 of them, 3 for each topic of confusion, but they can think whatever they want. And this is an additional motivation for the students to participate in it. So the model I've presented here, we have one little exercise left. I know I'll have to wrap up soon, but I don't, since I promised yesterday I'd show you this 2-stage exam, I want to briefly show it to you. So if you adopt this model of, you know, doing the information transfer online using Perusal or another mechanism, and in class using sense making, using peer instruction to create newses, this works online. It is online. I mean, suppose instead that on March 13th or whenever it was that I was sent home, when my students were sent home, I was doing the information transfer in the classroom on campus using a synchronous lecture and having the students make sense of the information at home through self-paced asynchronous homework or study. You know, what would I have done? I would have taken this onto online and use it via Zoom. But with my students being spread out around in many different time zones, I would very quickly have had to hit the record button. And then many students would simply have watched the asynchronous recorded lecture. And something really interesting would have happened, because now all of a sudden, in the entire educational process, the student is alone watching the recording at home, alone making sense of the information. Whereas deep down, education is a social process. You have to interact with others. And therefore, you know, the model that I presented, self-paced asynchronous information transfer, but interactive, and instructor-led synchronous sense-making, totally interactive, works well online and is completely interactive. It worked beautifully. I was completely well positioned. Now, and there's data. I didn't show you any data. I'm really very much of a data-driven person, but you know, there's data that shows both of these approaches are based on evidence that they actually work. I see, Rebecca, you have a question. If it's a very short question, I'll take it now. If you don't mind, we wait another 10 minutes and then I'm done with my talk and we can have a discussion.
Is it
a short question? Well, let's wait. Okay, great. Great, you're number 1 in the queue. Okay, so back to my project-based course. I decided, you know, to use the project as the backbone for my course, but of course we have a set of scaffolded practices that are loosely arranged according to Bloom's taxonomy at the understand level, at the apply level, and the evaluate level. So this is, in a sense, Bloom's taxonomy upside down, because I think Bloom typically has understanding at the bottom, not at the top. But this is the sequence in which we go through them for each unit and therefore each project in the class. So one part is essentially peer instruction. You've seen it. We do some tutorials, which are actually Lillian McDermott's tutorials that you know, are available both at the K-12 and the higher ed level. where the teams work on these worksheets in a group. Tom mentioned estimation activities that brought a broad smile to my face. So we have estimation 2. We have experimental activities where we teach them how to use their smartphone as an experimental tool, and so that they can take measurements and incorporate that into their project design. And then we have 2 that are evaluative processes. One is a problem set, which is very different. I'm very proud of the way we run problem sets, but I don't have time to talk about this. It was inspired by actually a middle school teacher. Reflection is a huge part of it. I can point you to a video that explains more about how we run these problem sets. This was done in collaboration with the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the guidance of Isa, who is here too. And the last is a readiness assurance activity, which I am going to give to you now, and that will be the end of my talk. So I'm sorry, but like any educational activity, this is ending with a test. I call it readiness assurance activity because I don't want to use the word exam. Also, I do this every week or 2 weeks. I do it very regularly. So rather than being summative, it's much more formative, the exam. Also, it's not as high stakes, and it's a team-based exam. So here's what we're going to do. Please go back to Learning Catalytics and join a new session, which I'm going to start in just a second. No, it's already running. Join session 14666-856. And I want you to enter the number of your team. So it'll ask you for your team number. Look at your name and just enter that number. Okay, some people have been very creative in their name. Ha ha ha, funny bunny. Good. I'm seeing the teams being populated here. You will see who else is in your team. The names that are on the Learning Catalytics are not the same as they are on Zoom, because I told people they could enter random information. But you will soon see who they are really. So please join that session and enter your team number. I'm just making sure that nobody's entering a team. So H-Town, Rebecca, you entered, and Techno, V. Kumari, please join the team of that is reflected in Zoom by the number in front of your name. So V, you should join team 24, and Rebecca Forrest, please help me, Sarah, find Rebecca and what her team assignment is. I don't have it. I'm scrolling through the list. Which one?
3.
3. Rebecca,
3.
you're 3. Constantine. Oh, Constantine joined his real team. So V. Kumari, 24. Not Techno, because you'll be alone in your team. You'll have a very lonely existence. And I see that several teams have only one person. That's bad. Maybe we can adjust. Oh, 24 now is 2. Dan McIsaac, where is the rest of your team? Where did it happen? So Greg Morrison, Lamberto, you're all in 27. Why are you not on? Don't let your team member down. Dan is sitting all alone there. Okay, maybe that got addressed now. Let's see. I just want to avoid teams of 1 because those don't work very well. So no, we still have only, so here's what I'm going to do.
Some people might be having trouble locating the join another session link. It's not obvious.
Okay, can you explain it since you just did it?
If no matter what session you're in, if you're still looking at the boat and the rock screen, down near the bottom, you'll see a couple of options. One of them is a little hyperlink that says join another session. If you click on it, you can then type in the number that you gave us in the chat. Somebody else has very nicely just created a whole URL for it that will take you there in one click.
Okay. And you know what I can do? What I can do is I could just quit the, I can just stop the other session. So when I do that, I'm going to stop the boat in the rock session there, boom. So people will be booted out of that session. Okay. So Robert White, if you end up being alone, join team 27. Okay. During the individual round, you can join another team, because, and 27 is where Dan McIsaac is now sitting all alone. So you, Dan, or Daniel, sorry, and Robert are alone. So I would say both congregate in room in team 27 if you end up being alone in a team round. Okay. No, that doesn't work. You won't know. Well, I'll keep an eye on it. I'll keep an eye on it. Okay, Robert already hopped over to 27. Terrific. Okay, so here are the instructions. You will, I'm going to go in the individual round. You'll have 4 questions. They're not hard questions. They're very easy. Well, some are maybe a little bit harder than others, but you'll have 4 questions. I want you to answer the 4 questions. You have exactly 3 minutes to answer the 4 questions, which is not much time, but that's okay. Just to get a sense. Here we go. So please mute your microphone and start the individual round now. We have some fast people. Already have close to 10% of the people have flown through all the questions. And even if you don't get to finish, no worries, because you'll have a second shot at the questions with your team.
If we're supposed to be doing this with our teams, shouldn't our microphones be on?
You will see. I'll put you I'll put you in breakout rooms, and then the microphone will be on. Thanks for the clarifying question. Okay, 30 more seconds left. Okay. So I'm going to request that you take your hands off the keyboard until you are in your breakout room. Because if you still have your hands on the keyboard, you might do something that you will regret later. Let me explain. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to put the program into the team round in a second. And I'm going to put you in the breakout rooms. The first thing that you need to do when you're in the breakout room is designate a responder. So you need to assign one of the people in your team to be the person who is going to answer for the team. Everybody can answer, but you want only one person to do it. And that person should get a consensus before he or she puts in any answers. It's probably a good idea to have the responder share the screen so that everyone can see what the responder is doing. Now, the reason I want your hands off the keyboard now is because as soon as I put it in the team round, if an answer comes in from an individual, it will be the team's answer. And if it's wrong, your team is going to be very unhappy with you. So hands off the keyboard, okay? Hands off the keyboard. I can't warn you enough, okay? So I'm going to start the team round with everybody here, which I don't typically do, but I'm going to do it here. So keep your microphone still muted because I want you to see something. So the team round has started now, and your screen should have reloaded. And at the top, there should be a new option. I forgot exactly how it's worded. I don't see it because I have the instructor screen, but it says reveal the answers of your team or see your team's responses. So there you can see how everybody else has responded. So you can see it for each of the 4 questions. Somebody already answered for the team. This person is going to be so unpopular. So be careful. Don't answer until you have agreement with your team. Okay, I said hands off the keyboard. Okay, we'll find out who that is in just a second. Be sure to chide that person and don't make that person the responder. Okay, so I'm going to put you in the breakout rooms. I'm juggling a lot of responsibilities here. Breakout rooms, there we go. And you will have 5 minutes to reach consensus on those questions and see what happens when you've answered all questions. So if you answer a question as a team incorrectly, you get a second shot at it for half credit. So 4 points if you get it right on the first try, 2 points if you get it right on the second try, 1 point if you get it right on the third try, 0 points, but the answer is revealed and the explanation is revealed if you still get it wrong. Good luck. See you soon. Sarah,
Yes.
can you come on?
Yeah.
I see we still have a few people who are unassigned.
Okay.
Jose, I'm going to put it in 28.
Yeah.
And Alethea Edwards. Are you there, Alethea? And I see some people who are not going into their room for one reason or another. So Alethea, I'm going to put her in which team?
Maybe 28, they might have only had 3.
21 only has 2.
Oh, okay. People have dropped off and maybe come back on.
Yeah, maybe.
There's now Joe Michnick.
Joe Michnick. Was he assigned to a room?
I don't recall that name. I did it quickly.
Sorry, I was in team 1. My
You were.
internet just went at my house. Sorry.
Oh,
And I
Okay.
I'm going
joined
to
the
put you
meeting.
back in. I'm going to put you back in 1.
No, I got
Thank you.
booted and then I came back.
Who is speaking
Who was
there?
that?
Somebody said something, but I didn't hear.
Yeah,
And
she
there are-
said she got booted and came back, but not sure who she is.
Okay, and Margaret is in 14, so I'm going to put her in 14. Kelly was in 18, but I don't know if Kelly's still here. Okay, now everybody is assigned, but we still have a couple of stragglers. Kristen, can you hear me, Kristen? You should be in room 15. For some reason, I see a couple of people who are not in their room. So if you're not in your team room, if you're not talking to your team members, then please click on Dagmara and Dr. Shu and Jose and Kim Well. Click on breakout rooms and join your breakout room. You should have been automatically assigned. So Deborah Edwards, are you just joining? Please unmute yourself. Deborah Edwards.
Yeah, sorry. No, my internet went down and I was like in and then out, and I'm just now trying to.
Okay, sorry about that.
I'm
Were you assigned to a team?
Yes, 11 was mine.
11. I'm going to put you back in 11.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Carrie.
Also, Zhang was in a room before, and are you on, Zhang?
Yeah, I am. It was 21. My Wi-Fi also went down.
Sure. Okay,
Okay.
21 again.
21.
Yes, thank you.
And Carrie Guarnera. Carrie, please unmute yourself.
My Wi-Fi went down, so I haven't even been in the discussion. So I'm sorry. So
Were you assigned to a team before?
yes, I was assigned to number 5, and I was in the list, and then my internet went down, so my computer screen.
Oh, okay. No worries. I'm going to put you back in 5.
Okay.
Okay. So Pete's iPhone, that doesn't work. Paul, for some reason, Paul is not in a breakout room and hasn't joined.
Yeah. Rob Sheffield.
Therese.
Is Rob there?
Paul or Teresa or Kimwell de Castro. Unmute yourself. I guess they must have either internet connection or some other problem. I don't know. Gergana, we already knew. Dr. Shu. Okay, Rob Sheffield. Okay, I'm going to take a few more minutes, okay? And then since there was so much interest in this team-based exam.
Kamul, are you there now? He was assigned.
There's also, there was one question that I wanted to put on your radar about, generated a lot of conversation about what to do when students, let me see how it was worded. What about students who don't do the information transfer first? This participant finds a large number of the students wait until the last minute to do the flip portion. So that generated a lot of conversation. And I thought maybe it's something you could address.
Yeah. So are any participants who are still here in the main room?
I was on section 14 and somehow you put me on 28. I don't know what happened. And 28 is empty, it's only me.
Okay, so I'm gonna put, Jose, I'm gonna put you in, sorry about that, 28.
14.
I'm gonna put you in 14?
Yeah, that's where I was before. That was the number was next to my name.
Okay.
So I just type a different name. I just put my initials there. That's probably why you didn't see me.
Okay, I put you in 14.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see if there's anybody else. Adela Ramirez. Please unmute yourself.
Lost internet and I just got it back.
So which team were you?
I'm on 10 in 10.
I'm gonna put you back in 10, okay?
Okay, thank you.
That works pretty well, huh? Except for the people who are clearly not at their computers.
Yeah, Margaret Chung was having trouble getting on. She said still can't get on at 11:23. That was a while ago though, I guess.
Yeah.
So maybe she worked it out. I'll ask her.
Yeah. It's a pretty big class too to handle. Yeah. Okay, we have 18 people who have completed the team round.
Eric, I had to take a phone call and step away for a little bit.
Yes.
What did you want me to do here? I'm kind of confused.
Well, you were supposed to be in room 25 with the rest of your team, and you are assigned. So if you click on breakout room at the bottom, you should see a way to join your team again.
Okay, hold on. Breakout room. Okie dokie, thank you.
Good.
Kelly Miller is back. Are you, Kelly, are you on?
No, she's teaching. I know she's teaching.
Okay.
So quick question, guys. Are we still on pace for 11:50 for our first video?
Oh, 11:50 for video. Yeah, I'm broadcasting a message here for people to come back.
Well, it shows you have a 15-minute break after this, but I guess maybe we're just gonna go through that.
Yeah, maybe I'll take a few questions and then we'll hand it over. Team 4 and team 8. Good job. Did you see the sort of the scoring at the bottom of your screen? Yeah. So you have an idea of how it works.
Yeah, we saw that.
Good. And there's a very low technology way of doing this too. But it's hard to do online because you need technology for online. I'm going to tell them to wrap up. 30 seconds left. $15 seconds left. Good, people are coming back. I see teams 4, 5, 24, 22. Very good. Almost everybody's back. I'm going to just yank people out of their rooms because we need to end. Where's my participant list? Here. So people are coming back. So those of you who are back, you should see on your screen, when you've answered everything, you should see sort of an accounting. You should see how much you got correct individually. This is an example from one that had 5 questions. This shows whether you got the questions correct on the first attempt, the second, the third, or not at all. And then essentially, this is your individual score. This is your team score. And then the actual score each person gets is an average between the team score and the individual score. If you have not yet completed the test, let's see, 71, no, not everybody has. Just type in some random answers at this point, just so you see that screen. I know you can no longer talk to your team, but it doesn't really matter, but you get a sense for it. And you see how, well, you don't see that here. I can see it on my screen, that the team score is always higher than the individual score. The only way that can happen is if no individual gets 100%. So you have to make these tests hard enough so that no individual gets 100% in the individual round. That was obviously not the case here. Also, if you do it online, you have to make your questions not Googleable, right? Because students have access to Google, which in my opinion is a good idea, because any question to which the answer can be Googled is not really an authentic assessment question. But here's the best thing. There is no grading. None. The grading is done. You have to put a little bit more effort up front, but there is no grading. It's done automatically. That's one of the beauties. And if you don't want to use technology, which you might very well not want to use, there are low-tech ways. There's the FAT scratch card, which I referred to already yesterday. I need to wrap up.
Just a fast comment. Just a fast comment. Question 2, for example, if you type 1 kilogram, the way you ask the question, 1-kilogram, give you an incorrect answer.
Let me show you.
Yeah, 1.0 got the wrong answer.
So there's some problem.
You forgot the units.
No. But if you type like you type on your question.
Okay, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me show you my screen where I see exactly what you're talking about. Here we go. So let's go there. So here you see in green the right answers and in red the wrong answer. 1 Newton is not correct. 1 kilogram is correct. 1 is not correct. Now here is a problem, which is the hyphen. Okay.
That's right. That's what we did before. Then we tried another one and we never got it right.
Yeah. So but that's easily addressable. I could go in and manually score that correctly. The hyphen is only used when you use it as an adjective rather than a noun. And that's why the platform doesn't recognize that. But 1.0 kilogram is fine. If you'd written down 1,000 gram, it would also be correct. If you would have written 2.2 pounds, it would also have been correct. So it knows exactly how to convert units and so on. And the other thing is, look also how it interprets mathematics. I mean, you could have added, here somebody said x equals, even though that's not strictly necessary, it counted it correct. If you had written 3 minus 4y plus sine 0, it would also have been counted correct. So yes, some notation like this hyphen, it doesn't recognize, because strictly speaking, that is not the right way of expressing it. But I understand if a student does this in my class, I quickly go into review the results, which you can do in the interface, and I manually count it correct. Okay, but I'm not here to demonstrate that, because as I said, the technology is not really that relevant. You can do this without any technology by using these if-at scratch cards, which work beautiful. And that's what I initially did in my class before learning catalytics came around. I hope that I've convinced you that information is not just about transferring information or getting our students to do what we do. I want my students to stand on my shoulders. I want them to solve problems that I cannot solve. I want them to be able to get higher. And I think that's what we need to. We want the next generations to solve the problem that this generation can't solve. I mean, there's so many problems in the world: conflict, energy, healthcare, you name it. And this generation is not able to solve it. We must equip the next generation with the tools to do that. And I think the only way to do it is this social interaction that we've demonstrated here. So I'm gonna take 1 or 2 questions, and then unfortunately we have to move on. I'm sorry I took more time, but it was because I got overly ambitious and wanted to fulfill some of the requests that were asked yesterday. I'm so sorry, and I'm grateful for your patience. I'll stick around during all the breaks and be happy to talk either at the congregate tables or here in the main room in Zoom. And I know that, who was it who had a hand up very patiently before V and Drew? Must be somebody who lost internet connection and now the hand is down.
Yeah, it was me, Carrie Ganeri. I had my hand up.
Yes.
But I think there was another lady before me that you said to wait. So there was another lady before me.
I think
Claim
it may
your-
have been me.
Yes, it was you, Rebecca.
Yes, it was you, Rebecca. So Rebecca, you go first, and then who was it who just spoke?
It was Carrie.
Carrie.
Ganeri.
So Rebecca, Carrie, then V, then Drew, then we go on to the next session.
So
Rebecca.
I love peer instruction. I've been doing it for a very long time. Right now, I am trying to figure out how to best implement it in the fall. In the spring, I was using Teams and I was totally online, and I was using forms for students to answer questions, and that worked fine. In the fall, my university is going to be trying to have both online and face-to-face sessions. So I'm going to have groups in class, and I need some technology that is going to work for everybody with Teams. And I don't know if we should talk about this later, or if you have suggestions, or if anyone else has suggestions for different ways to do that. My university uses Turning Point clickers.
I see. So I used Turning Point clickers for a long time. So first of all, if you use Teams, what I recommend is, we renamed you, remember? for this session. That's, by the way, I turned on the ability for you to rename yourself again, so you can remove the number now and you can add your pronouns behind it if you want, if you so desire. So I rather than renaming my students, I tell my students, you're in team 1, you're in team 2, you're in team 3, and they rename themselves. Okay, so I don't have to do any of that. And then the assignment in the breakout rooms in Zoom is very quick, because you just create as many breakout rooms as you want, and then you say assign, and you do check, check, check all the 1s in 1, check, check, check all the 2s in 2. So that's very quick. But then for polling, when I've demonstrated this online, I shy away from using Learning Catalytics because it's a commercial platform. You can license it from Pearson. If you use textbooks from Pearson, it often comes with it. I have used Poll Everywhere. There are many, like Mentimeter and a number of others. So maybe we can sort of collect in the chat later, or in Slack, a number of resources that can be used for online polling. But there are more and more that now work, that you can use in parallel. I do not recommend using the polling in Zoom. I used it, and then I noticed that the whole peer instruction didn't work that well. The reason is the poll does not follow you into the breakout rooms. So you give the poll in the main room, and then you send people in the breakout room, and the poll is gone. They don't see it anymore. And if it's a question that has many choices, they don't even remember which choice is what. So the poll in Zoom does not work for the peer instruction. You need to have some platform that people can take with them in the breakout room, like Learning Catalytics. I see Celestina here having a recommendation. So I hope that that helps. Rebecca, where are you? There you are, I see. And maybe we can continue to share resources. Carrie, you're next.
Okay. Yes, sir. So in your lecture, and I loved it because, like you said, you used, I guess, whatever your terminology was, and now they say flipped. So I was making a list. It says you really don't lecture anymore. You present a question, and then you have them think about it. You poll it, discuss it, repoll, and explain. So where do they get the meat of the understanding of forces? Let's say, do you do this on introduction of forces? I mean, I'm teaching obviously at the high school level, so they don't know anything. So if I pose a question, we're obviously trying to see prior knowledge. And then when do you actually give them their information? After you figure out that they either got it wrong or what?
Both before and after, right? So I hope that before they come to class, they've at least been exposed to the equivalent of a lecture.
Okay,
which is not, which, as we know, is not much. So I do it by having them read and interact and annotate using the platform perusal that I just mentioned. Okay. That's my current approach because I find that works the best for me. You can also have them annotate a recorded lecture or anything else you want, or you could use just-in-time teaching, which is a technique you can read more about at jitt.org.
Yeah, okay, so they basically are responsible for, like you said, their own learning. They're going to go and do it before they even come to class. So I teach obviously on level physics.
Define learning.
Well, I'm saying do the pre-reading or the pre-understanding of the lecture. And again, I teach seniors that are ready to get out of school. They're on level. Now my AP kids will do it. They will because they want that grade or they want that whatever. But that's what my question was, is you give them pre-assignment, so to speak, the pre-learning, the pre-reading, the pre-whatever, and then we come to class, discuss, and then reinforce the correct understanding.
Yeah, I would not have too high expectations of the pre-reading. I mean, even for Harvard students. There's only so much you get out of it, but then even my stellar lectures got very little done in terms of understanding. So the pre-reading at least gets the definitions out of the way. I mean, the sort of the very, 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 very basic stuff. And one of the ways to reinforce the intrinsic motivation is to connect what you do in the class to the feedback that you get from the pre-class assignment. right? If I'm a student and I struggle with something and I say, I don't understand this, can somebody explain this to me? Students jump in, and then you, as the instructor in class, say, hey, Carrie Guarnera, before coming to class, posted this on Perusal or asked this question, and now you show the question. You'll go, wow, actually, it helps when I, verbalize my misunderstanding, and I have a chance of getting help from either other students in my class or from the instructor and from the in-class activities, because it connects the out of class with the in-class.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. This was a wonderful talk.
Well, thank you. And I'm sorry it was too long. V, and I think somebody else had a hand up, but it went down. But let's go to V, and I'll take one more question after that.
Yeah, it's a brief two-part question. Sometimes I've been using Perusal and it doesn't generate confusion report. Do you have a solution for that? And the second part of the question is, what do you do once it generates confusion report? How do you go about using those questions in class?
Right. So if that's a good point, V. Thank you for raising that. So if the number of annotations is too small, it cannot generate a confusion report. But if the number of annotation is small, then you might as well read them.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the confusion report is good when you have a big class like I have, but it's not that important if you have a class of 20 students, because you can probably click here and there and get a pretty good feel for the questions that are asked.
Yeah.
Some instructors will actually in class give a report of the questions I mentioned to students.
Yeah.
Oh, Sophia had this question yesterday. Let's talk about this question. Typically what I do is I bounce the question back at the student. So rather than saying, Sophia had this question, here's the answer, I say, Sophia had this question, let's discuss it. And I use it in a peer instruction cycle. Because then it sticks, rather than students just writing down what the answer is and trying to memorize it. So that's how I use it, whether it comes from the confusion report or just from reading the questions when they're small in number. It's not that big a difference.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. Drew, you get the last question.
Oh boy, no pressure, huh? This may be too big of a question even. So if I can talk about this afterwards, that'd be great. I was wanting to talk about lab work and experiments, given that I'm assuming since all your students are going to be online at Harvard, I guess, what are your thoughts about either synchronous or asynchronous lab work? And then what role or how can socialization play a role in online lab work where you don't have the physical social presence that you would in in-person labs?
Yes, that's a very good point, and that's indeed a very big question. I could give a 90-minute talk about that. I think the important point to keep in mind is that what we are really trying to accomplish in our courses, you and I, all of us, and I realize I'm speaking on behalf of many people here, and you may not agree with my statement, and if so, say that. I think what we really are trying to teach is a way of thinking. Physics, in a sense, is a process. It's not about memorizing facts or even memorizing procedures. Or physics is a way of thinking, and I have found that you can accomplish that goal in many different ways. And when I was first faced with moving my project-based course online in the spring, my immediate reaction was, oh my God, this is a tremendous challenge. And I was trying to think, how can I map this online? How can I map that online? Rather than what I ended up doing is thinking, how can I seize the new opportunities? Think about this workshop, right? I mean, we planned this as a 25 in-person workshop at Harvard. Many of you would not have been there. We've been able to accomplish more by virtue of being online. Now, I mean, you probably don't want that in your classes and get 75 additional students. But still, there might be things you can do by reaching out to the community, by having a community-based project, by putting the problem in another context. Are there things you can find around the house to do a meaningful measurement? And I find that the biggest problem is really the limits of our imagination, and the problem that I had even when I started teaching, that it's very hard to think out of the box. We're not trained to do that with respect to our teaching. But if you let your imagination flow there, and if you're not so wedded to the content and more focused on physics as a way of thinking and the skills that you want to teach, I think there are plenty of opportunities. And I'm happy to talk about that informally later, but I really need to zip up my mouse here. I've had way too much floor time here, many more than I even wanted. So my apologies again. And thank you all for participating in this. I hope it was useful, and I'll be happy to follow up with anybody who wants more information. Thank you all. Should we have a 5-minute break and then reconvene at 12:03? We'll be about 10 minutes behind.
Yes, let's take a 5-minute break and be back at 12:03, like Eric said. Eric, thank you so much. See everyone shortly.
Thank you.
Hi, Eric. Are you still in this chat?
I am, yes. I'm just grabbing a bite because I haven't had my breakfast. So
Sorry about that. I have a quick comment or question. So I've been doing this whole concept of using assessments as learning tools instead of assessments, because that's the biggest idea, right? Like when you're doing the whole group piece, instead of actually wanting a grade, now they're learning from each other, and that's the moment they're most passionate, right? Like even if they're wrong, they want the answer to be correct, right? So the way I grade it is in 3 parts. So it's the individual piece first, then the group piece, and I allow the kids to get back their points by doing a separate reflection thing. So the way they would get back their points is, I chose this answer because, and then the correct answer is this because, right? So it's forcing them to actually acknowledge why they chose what they chose and why they're, would you suggest still using all 3 as an assessment, or would you divide? Because this way the kids don't take a retake. When we give retakes in high school, they either do worse, they still don't come studying it. But when they know their grades can only go up when they're trying to tell me why. So it's not a new test, it's just why.
yeah, so I think the reflection part is crucial. In the exercise that we did, there was no reflection part. But everything we do to train the students up to that point does include a reflection part, or has no evaluation credit whatsoever, so that they don't feel that they just have to get the right answer. Because that's what I want to get them away with, right? Any real problem in life, we already know where we want to get. The outcome is known. How to get there is the big question. So for example, with the homework, the reflection is half of the credit, and getting the right answer doesn't even, carry any credits. The effort and the reflection that is essentially the entirety of the evaluation of their homework. So what you say, I love it. I think it's really important, because if we all talk about lifelong learning and the importance of lifelong learning, and in order to and perhaps that is the most important skill to impart on our students, how to continue to learn. Because once we give them a diploma, whether it's at the high school level or at the college level or at the postgraduate level, that's not when learning stops. That's when learning maybe really starts, because now you have to do it on your own in order to continue to do well in your field. And in order to continue to learn without feedback from others, without guidance, you have to be able to evaluate yourself. And equipping students with the ability to evaluate themselves is critical. I did not have much time to talk about it, but I'm very happy that you raised it. So I think really important. Yes. It's 12:03, so I'm going to hand it over to Itzel.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you all. There are so many questions. Thanks again, Eric. Eric will be around for the breaks, so please feel free to continue the conversation there. Also a reminder, we do have a Slack channel for session 7, so you can keep your comments or your questions or thoughts, any resources in channel 7 that correspond to, or session 7, sorry, that correspond to Eric's talk. So with that, we are now going to transition to the next session of our workshop, the science of learning. But before we do that, I have a couple announcements that I want to make that we have already made via Slack, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first, as Eric already mentioned, is that if you would like to include your gender pronouns in your name, you can do so by editing your profile on Slack, and you can also do that by editing your name here on Zoom. Really quickly, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, it's not allowing me to do that right now, but that's okay. So I'll walk you through this process so we're all on the same page. So if you click on the 3 dots over your screen, you will see that you have the option to rename. If you click rename, you will have a box where you can go ahead and edit your display name, and you can enter your gender pronouns if you so choose. So that is the first announcement. The second announcement, so we've received some feedback from all of you, and this is one of the things that I love about being in such a community. And the feedback is that we would like to ask everybody to be mindful of the ratio of listening versus talking time. So we've heard from some new people today. That is great. So just be mindful of that. And so related to that, we are encouraging the facilitators to really, the chairs of each session, sorry, to be selective with who speaks. So we ask before you speak that you are recognized by the chair of the session, and you can get recognition in a few ways. You can, of course, raise your digital Zoom hand during the Q&A, which is more of an interactive session. You can post your questions in the chat or in Slack. I hope that you can understand we have over 100 people with us today here. So we're trying really hard to keep up with all the questions, but because we do want to be mindful, make sure that everybody has a chance to be included, just raise your hand or be recognized by the chair before you speak. Or if there's a procedural question that needs immediate attention, type it in the chat and we'll try our best to get back to you ASAP. All right, are we good? Thumbs up. Excellent. So without further delay, I am so excited to introduce our next speaker. So we are now in session 8, the science of learning. Our speaker is Pamela Ward from John Jay High School in San Antonio, Texas. And today she will be talking to us about teaching your students how to learn. So with that, Let's hand it over to Pamela.
Welcome to Teach Your Students How to Learn, where we'll discuss strategies you can use to teach your students ways to enhance their long-term learning and reduce their academic stress. My name is Pamela Word, and I'm the Science Department Coordinator and a physics teacher at John Jay High School in San Antonio, Texas. I've been teaching for about 15 years, and the past 2 years I've become especially interested in cognitive science research, which is what the strategies that we'll discuss today are based on. I'm interested not only in looking at this research, but looking at ways that I can incorporate this research into my classroom. I'm incredibly excited to share these strategies with you today, not only as tools for your classroom, but also, as the title of my presentation suggests, to teach your students these strategies explicitly so that they can be successful beyond your classroom as well. I tell my students my goal is not just to teach them physics, but to teach them the strategies they need so that they can be successful in anything. At our school, I teach AP Physics 1, and this is the class students take their junior year, along with many other AP classes, varsity athletics, and their college searches. So they're under a lot of stress. And they will often tell me that my class is the first class that they've had to study for. And they will also tell me that they spend hours studying, but to no avail, that they're not successful. So how can we break students out of this cycle? First, we start with this conversation. How many of you have ever studied for a test and not done well? It's guaranteed that many students will raise their hand. And even among this audience of educated and successful professionals, I'm sure we've all had that experience. Then I would ask students to reflect in writing on these follow-up questions. How do you study? Why do you study this way? And does it work? And we have already acknowledged that in at least one instance it didn't work. So why do students continue to study in a way that doesn't work? Often it's just the way they've always done things. And they are hesitant to take the risk of trying a new strategy. What if the return is even less? Additionally, they may have tried a strategy that is more effective, but while trying it, they experienced a struggle. And as teachers, we know that some struggle is necessary to have deep learning. That's our ultimate goal, to have them learn the material deeply and long-term in a way that they can carry on to subsequent courses. And we know that that struggle is necessary, but when a student encounters that in their individual studies, they may take that as a sign that the strategy is not working. When students are asked these questions, often the types of strategies they are using are strategies such as note-taking, highlighting, rereading. And the research is clear. These strategies are possibly somewhat effective in the short term, but they are not going to give us the long-term learning that we desire for our students. So, why are these strategies ineffective? These strategies lead students to one of two illusions: the illusion of fluency, the illusion of confidence. The illusion of fluency means that students have become very familiar with their materials. Rereading especially lends itself to this illusion. They can predict what word comes next in any given sentence, but that fluency doesn't equate to understanding the material. Additionally, students experience this illusion if the learning activities they're engaging with are too easy. The students think that they just get it and they don't have to engage further with the material. They may also experience an illusion of confidence. Students sometimes, when they study, focus on the material that they already know. They want that positive feedback, and so they ask themselves the questions that they know the answers to. Or they might study in a way that feels easy. Definitely, if we're looking at the cognitive load of rereading and highlighting, that's not very hard. That's easy for most students to do. And so they're going to become confident that they've completed their study and that they know what they're talking about, but then they have that rude awakening when they see their score. So the most effective strategies for long-term learning are listed here, and they're in order of increasing evidence based on cognitive science research. The first one, elaboration. And I will say that many of these strategies are already in use in your classrooms to some degree. But I want to remind you that I think it's important that we are, again, teaching our students why we use these strategies, why they're effective, and how they can use them outside the classroom. So in this strategy of elaboration, we're seeking to make more connections with the material, generating questions about the concept, making connections with other concepts, making connections to daily life, which I think is super easy in physics. Or maybe we're asking students to teach the concept to a peer or a family member, or recording themselves so that they can get that experience. Next, we have dual coding. And this is where we're comparing words and pictures, maybe in our notes or the textbook. We might give students a visual so that they can explain it in their own words, or we might ask students to create a visual from a text that we provide. This image is from a blog from the Learning Scientists about dual coding, and you'll see that it includes both images and text. And it may seem like this is related to the idea of learning styles, but it is 100% not, and you can read more about that in that blog post. The next strategy is spaced practice. This is the anti-cramming. We're always trying to tell our students this, to study a little bit every day. We don't want to study immediately after class, but we want to have some space from the class time. And we can build this into our lessons by asking students about previous learning. We can also explain explicitly why we are asking them about previous learning, and emphasize to students that forgetting is part of the learning process, and that as we continue to do this, we are enhancing those connections in our brain. Interleaving is something that we use when we are dealing with concepts that are similar, and asking students to distinguish between those concepts in order to solve a problem. So we may ask students to look at some situations where forces are balanced and what motion results, and then we may ask them to look at some situations where forces are unbalanced and what motion results. But eventually all teachers are mixing those situations up, right, and asking students to determine what strategy are you taking in this problem. Students can do this on their own by referring to those problems at the end of the textbook. They definitely are going to see problems that are grouped by topic, but then in that more problems section at the end, they'll see all the different types of problems presented in that chapter mixed up, and that gives them the opportunity to practice identifying what the best strategy is. And that's going to help with their long-term learning. And then for last, I've saved the heaviest hitter, retrieval practice. So many of those ineffective strategies are linked to getting information into the student's brain. Retrieval practice focuses on students getting the information out of their brain. So they're responding to questions, they're trying to pull the information from their brain. Super important that students are provided feedback in this process, identifying if their answer is correct or incorrect and why. And it's also an opportunity to emphasize that mistakes are part of the learning process. And so these activities should be low stakes. So when I say retrieval practice, I'm not saying give the students a quiz or give them a test. That's the assessment at the end that's going to determine what they know at the end of the lesson. But retrieval practice really needs to be built in all throughout the lesson, giving them the opportunity to see what they know. Some examples of retrieval practice. You may have heard of a brain dump. That's an example of retrieval practice. We'll look at a modified example in a moment. In a brain dump, you're kind of saying everything or having students write everything that they know, but you might ask them something more focused, like just to tell me 2 things about the lesson from the previous day. We'll look at an example of Cornell note-taking and how that can be used with retrieval practice. Flashcards, this is a time-tested strategy, but if you're not using them correctly, then you're not using them for retrieval. So many students may just get in the habit of reading through their flashcards and not taking that moment to pause and try and retrieve the information. They, in that case, if they're just rereading, then they can fall under that illusion of fluency. They might be able to predict what the next answer is just because they've gone through that stack so many times. And that is an important reason to reorder the cards periodically. And then finally, we have practice tests or mini quizzes, and these should not be open notes. So you can definitely bring the notes back when we're looking for feedback, but initially students need to see what they know. Mini quizzes are something that I do specifically in my class, where I ask students a couple of questions at the beginning of each period that relates to some previous material. And I keep it low stakes by adding all of these questions up as kind of individual points for a low weighted quiz. So you can have assignments that are worth some points, but it needs to be at very low stakes. So here's the example of our Cornell notes. In case you're not familiar, we have the notes section on the far right. In the left-hand column, we have an area for vocabulary that we're pulling from those notes, or maybe we're generating some questions about the material in those notes. We can use this later on to study by covering up that notes section and then using the cues or the questions to retrieve the information. The notes are then available for us to use as feedback. You can also, sometime after the initial class period, complete the summary. And that is, again, if we do this without notes, that allows for retrieval of the information. And then we can check for accuracy using the notes section. So I mentioned a brain dump earlier, and you can make this very general and no prep and just have students write for a certain period of time. This is a bit modified from a blog called The Effortful Educator. And I use this with my students right before semester exams. And I gave them some vocabulary words to write about in a certain period of time, and they wrote what they remembered. So this was at the semester exam, and this is a topic that was from the very beginning of the school year. And after the first round, they highlighted the information that they were able to identify themselves in one color. Then they spoke with a partner and added information that their partner had written down that they did not have previously on their notes, and highlighted that in a second color. And then the third round, they went through their notes and added in additional information. So this is giving students an opportunity to try and retrieve the information, also to get feedback, and also as a study aid, they're able to see now what they know and what they still need to visit as they're preparing for the exam. So throughout all of these processes, as we are teaching the strategies, students need feedback. They need to be able to check their work for accuracy. They need to be able to either reach out to a teacher or use their notes or textbook to see if they are retrieving the information accurately. Otherwise, these methods won't be effective. It's also a good idea to encourage metacognition in other ways, such as making judgments of learning on practice tests and quizzes. So for each question, how confident do you feel? And then when you get your results, you can reflect on, I felt confident and I got this correct, or I felt confident and I didn't get this correct. So to summarize, our effective strategies for long-term learning are elaboration, dual coding, space practice, interleaving, and retrieval practice. And these are all strategies that to some extent we already use in our classroom, but we can maybe use with some more intentionality and also teach to our students so that they can recognize them as strategies that work in all classrooms and not just our own. I want to end with just some resources. If you're interested in more information, we have the books that got it all started for me, Make It Stick and Powerful Teaching, Understanding How We Learn. We've got some podcasts by the same websites and Twitter handles. And then the very last piece I want to leave you with are the database of retrieval practice research and a video series that can be very helpful with teaching these strategies to your students. I hope that this has been informative, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Pamela. There was a lot of excitement about the ideas you have shared today. Again, a reminder, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your digital Zoom hand, and I will go ahead and recognize you so that you may ask Pamela a question. And I was scanning the chat, and I did not see any questions, just a lot of excitement from all of you. So our first question is from Michael Lerner. Michael, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, what do you think is the best intervention you've done in class, or the best lesson you've done in class to have kids, once they realize like it's something that they can do, that they actually then do it in their own practice? Like you seem to had that breaking the ice idea, and then you told us that stuff, like what strategy do you start with, or like how do you get them to actually do it once they realize they need that need?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think that probably the best has been the low stakes quizzing in class. So once they've had that opportunity to try questions and revisit them and get feedback, and they see that when they reattempt those questions later, that they're more successful based on that low stakes quizzing. And so that's generally what I start with.
Thank you. Any other questions for Pamela? A lot of applause. Well done, Pamela.
Thank you.
There is a comment by Kristen on the chat about brain dumps on whiteboards. So I was wondering if you could elaborate on this a little bit, just say more about that.
So
Nikolai. Oh, okay.
So I do a very similar thing where I was trying to figure out how to help kids prepare in a less teacher-driven manner. They always want me to like reteach a whole semester in a class period, and I know that that's like absurd. So I decided on a whim, like put topics on different whiteboards. So like one would be like impulse momentum, conservation of momentum, kinematics, and there would be like 8 different stations, and the kids in their groups have 5 minutes at each station to add whatever they want. So if it's kinematics, you might get some kids focusing on position time graphs and velocity time graphs. Some kids might work on formulas. Some kids might add something about like the velocity and the acceleration having to have opposite signs if it's slowing down versus speeding up. And so within that little 5 minutes, they have to read what's on the board that other groups have already written, so that they don't duplicate something that's there, and they can either add, sometimes they're correcting, sometimes they're elaborating on what another group did, and then they walk around the room within, you know, like in a class period, if they're 5 minutes at each station, it takes the entire hour, because at the very, very end, they realize how valuable it is, and they go to each board and take pictures of it so that they can start studying from those things. So I think it's a collaborative way to do that. So
yeah, that's great. And I actually I will do that with my physics C students who are taking physics for the second time. That's generally how we start each unit. I have them do brain dumps so that we have the starting point, we see what they can retrieve from the previous year. So yeah, I love using the whiteboards and the brain dump in that way.
Next question is by El Marie.
Next question is mine.
Would you mind getting on queue? I can go ahead and call on you next, but El Marie was next in line, so we're going to go ahead and let her speak if you don't mind.
Paola, thank you for this. I was actually, while you were talking, I was going back into my lesson plans, and maybe this is the correct place to ask it. There was at a stage articles being in the physics education manuals about strategies that highly successful physics students use. Because I do remember taking those articles and making them sort of, and I've expanded a little bit, and I gave my students in the beginning of the year a 10-point thing, exactly what you were saying. You know, how do you go through being successful in the year? But what I want to actually hook onto that brain dump is the one thing that I tell my students is you can make a mind map, just how all the connections work together. And so some students who think more visual would draw pictures, some would just make words, some would actually link equations to each other. And that's an extremely successful way of recalling stuff before the exam, to help the students.
Yeah, and I feel like that definitely is incorporating multiple of those strategies, right? You're making the connections for the elaboration piece, you're making the visual and verbal connections, and you're retrieving. So I think that's a very impactful strategy. Yes, I would agree.
All right, Nikolai, please go ahead. Thank you for your.
Okay, at last, I have a question. Pamela, do you think about the link between motivation of learning and strategy of learning? Because I have experience of it. For example, in Russian, they are dividing two parts of motivation. Outside motivation from fear of punishment, for example, from the teacher, from the parents, or other one. For example, parents want high level result. That's why students have to learn. And another motivation is inside. You want to learn something, to feel that you already more interested man. That's why I think that we have to consider the link between motivation and strategy of learning. Do you understand me?
Yes, I think I do. Yeah, there's definitely those different types of motivation, but I feel like you can help to build students' motivation if they experience some success. And then also if they are, if you're using these low stakes methods of retrieval, and again, building up the students with feedback and repeated opportunities, I think you can build their motivation in a subject. I think sometimes students appear unmotivated because they don't feel that they can be successful. Or maybe they are so attached to the grade or the punishment, for not being successful, that they are very resistant to try and put themselves out there. And so that's why it's important for the retrieval practice to be low stakes, is they need to be able to try to truly attempt questions like that without the fear of punishment.
Because it's very interesting phenomena. When I was student, before a lot of time, in Bulgaria, we have too many Chinese students, and they have only outside motivation. If they don't become good estimation in exam, they go to their ambassador and they go back in the China, because in China was very, very bad way of life. And in Bulgaria was very good way of life. And this was their punish. And they always have a good student. That's why this outside punish is not very bad always. But I made the next. I use training experiments to coordinate two ways of motivation. In one team, work these students with outside motivation, and this student with inside motivation.
Nikolai, I'm going to jump in and interrupt you and ask that this conversation is continued either on Slack or during lunch. We are running behind on time.
Okay.
Thank you for your contribution. Also, just to name it, I think we need to be careful to generalize to whole students and systems of education. So I want to caution against that. And before we move on, I do want to make time for 2 more questions to people who have been waiting patiently. And one question is in the chat by Jolene Johnson. Jolene, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. And then after this, we'll have Joanne Aronson. And then we will move on to our next talk.
Hi, I loved your talk. Thank you. My question is, what do you do to get the students to buy into this outside of when they're required to in class? Like, one thing I've done is try to teach them some of the science, and that's effective for some students, but not all students. So what else do you do to get them to like do it, even if they know it's effective?
Like, I definitely do the lessons in class, right? And then for students that are struggling with this, this past year we started doing kind of study groups where we can emphasize more outside of class. Okay, well, this is a strategy that we use in class. How could we use it now with the resources you have to help prepare you for that next exam? So, and that kind of got cut short. I started a little bit late this past year with that, and then we were out of class, but that I think is something that could be really effective in the future, especially for those kids that are struggling. They're like, I want to do well, and I'm not being effective. And so I definitely saw a positive response to hosting those study groups so that I could spend more time with students to help them incorporate them into their own study. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. And then last but not least, Joanne Aronson. Please unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. And I'll try to be quick. It's a little more nuts and bolts. And this is really addressed to both you, Pamela, which thank you. It was excellent, great strategies, especially for the new teachers I have. And also to Kristen, I believe it was, about the brain dumps on the whiteboards when you spoke about students add in as they're going around and make corrections to what's on the whiteboards. I know when I've done things like this, whether it's on a whiteboard or something else, I allow students to make corrections, but maybe in a different color or something, and not to cross it out, so that we could then have a discussion as a group about, okay, so let's discuss what we see. And I just wanted to know from either of the two of you how you address the correction part. Thank you.
Yeah, when we've done feedback for the whiteboard brain dumps that I've done in class, generally I'll kind of walk the room, walk the whiteboards, and then we'll come back as a whole group and provide some feedback that way. Because as I mentioned, that feedback piece is super important. We can't just leave the boards as is. We have to address any issues that have come up.
Excellent. All right, everyone, if you could join me thanking Pamela for her great talk. And next, we will transition to our following speaker, Chad Hobby from Timber Creek High School in Orlando. And today he will be talking to us about experimental design.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about experimental design in high school physics. And I just really, you could apply this to any science class that you have. It doesn't have to be a high school physics class. I've got some pictures of my kids here acting as scientists, which you'll find is like the main theme of my talk today, is that anybody can be a scientist. So every year, at the beginning of the year, I start off with my students talking about what are the qualifications to be a scientist. And I have students brainstorm this in groups, and then we have a class discussion about it, and we make a list. And I ask them to provide evidence to support their qualifications, and they can, or their list of qualifications, and they can do that with just a simple Google search, or look in the textbook, or from historical examples, or modern job searches, that sort of thing, and what it takes to be a scientist and what it took to be a scientist. But in my eyes, the most important qualifications are curiosity, imagination, and persistence. And education also helps, but it doesn't have to be a formal education like we have nowadays. A lot of historical scientists didn't have formal educations if you look way back in the day, you know. And so with that in mind, students can be scientists too. In fact, some of them already have more curiosity and imagination than, you know, actual scientists. And as a result, they're naturally gifted towards wanting to do science. And it's not till later in life that, sometimes we take that imagination and we punish it in science class. And that's what I'm trying to avoid with my classes, that allowing kids to be explorative and curious and imaginative in science. If we look at science education nowadays, most teachers that still do labs some teachers don't do labs anymore. They're used to show students a concept or to educate them. And these are great. This is a good thing. It's a good training exercise because it's important for students to understand the basics before you can even do science. And a lot of scientists build on the work of other scientists and recreate the experiments of their peers. But these labs in education, they're carefully structured and controlled to give predictable results. And the students can only fail at the lab if they don't follow the instructions for the lab. It's kind of like riding a bike with training wheels or following a recipe. It's good for training, but it's not the same as being a real scientist. Being a real scientist, you have to ask your own questions, create your own procedure, build your own equipment, and deviate from the established procedure, and sometimes do new things that other people haven't tried or may disagree with. And sometimes you get criticized for trying these new things as a scientist. And of course, you're taking careful observations and analyzing data during your experiments. And a big thing that a lot of students don't realize is that a lot of times when you're a real scientist, you fail or your experiments fail. They don't always work out the way you want to. But you have to keep trying and persisting to get an answer to your question that you want to figure out, or the purpose of your experiment. And this is really important to me, and it actually is highlighted, I think, by a quote by Albert Einstein, that imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited, but imagination encircles the world. Students need to see that science is creative and engaging. It's a creative process. More like, I feel like sometimes we teach science too much like history class and not enough like art class. Because science at its core, when this whole thing first started, was all about imagination, creativity, exploration, looking for new things. And the knowledge is an outer shell. The knowledge that we focus on in science class is the shell that science has garnered as a result of being creative and exploring over, thousands of years of creation. And I feel like our science classes, we're just focusing too much on just the knowledge part and just teaching students to memorize things or pay attention to lectures. And we need to have more focus on the core of science, which is that imagination that Einstein is referring to. So I want students to feel like they can be a scientist, and that being a scientist is not about knowing things. It's about searching for knowledge, and about creating. I'm still learning how to do this in my class. And every year my students are my sort of like my experiment, that I'm trying new things to make them feel more like scientists and for them to have more creative opportunities in science class. So I still use traditional labs too, just not all the time. For example, if I'm running behind on schedule, I will often just use a traditional lab because it's going to be faster. Let's take a look at how it works in my classroom. When I do these labs, which are where they can feel more like a scientist in these labs because they have more control. I don't give them complete control over the lab like they would if they were actually a real scientist, right? This is where training them to become scientists. That's our goal here. I don't let them pick the topic of the exploration. I give them a purpose for their lab. Like, our goal is to study electricity in this lab, or we're going to focus on how the kinematics of a car is, or the speed of a car, or acceleration. So I give them a purpose for the lab, and then I give them equipment that they can use, and I demonstrate how the equipment can be used. For example, I teach them how to use a meter stick, and that's a simple example, but for the electricity labs, I teach them how to use a multimeter. I don't tell them what they have to do during the lab, but I tell them how to use the equipment. That way they know how to actually use it to measure things. So if they're working with some software, you need to train them on that software, and you can do this with your class also. And I find that students are much more engaged and they are more interested in actually doing the lab and paying more attention to the lab when they have control. You have to remember most teenagers or students don't have a lot of control over their lives. Their parents make a lot of decisions for them. So when you give them some control, they love it. They eat it up. But at the same time, giving them more control over the lab and not telling them exactly what to do is going to lead to some frustration at first. They might never have had a lab before where someone just didn't give them a procedure to follow. I'm asking them to write their own procedure for these labs, and they might not like that because they're not used to that. They just want to be told what to do sometimes. So at first, they usually do not like writing their own detailed procedure. So I start at the beginning of the year doing this sort of, we have to build this up. At the beginning of the year, we start with a simple lab, something like determining the speed of a car, and I let them write their own procedure on how they're going to do that. And then I want it to be detailed. I remind them that other scientists would need to be able to recreate this procedure or recreate this lab by following this procedure if it was a real lab. They also have trouble designing a data table, I find. You have to kind of teach them how to make a data table. It seems like a simple thing, but you have to remember that they need practice on these things. And sometimes students will measure things that don't matter for the experiment, or they have no effect on it, like, I don't know, the color of a car doesn't determine how fast it goes. But they include these things in their data, and you just let them do it. Sometimes their experiment that they design isn't going to work for what they want it to do. Maybe they're trying to measure the speed of a car, but they're only measuring the seconds. They're not measuring the distance also. Sometimes they get inconclusive results. And that's part of being a real scientist, is failing. You have to remember, right? Like we talked about, that scientists often fail. And learning from those failures is an important lesson for them. So I encourage them to try new things. I give them praise for trying something new. Sometimes when I give them a guidelines, I give them a procedure for a traditional lab, and then they try something new, I get excited because they're deviating. They're exploring. They're looking for something else. And so I give them praise or bonus points if it's really good work for looking for new things. So I encourage this, and you need to continue to encourage this throughout the year in order to establish that you want them to explore and be creative and show imagination in science. At the end of the lab, we collaborate and we share the results of our experiments. We also have them share their procedures. So I give each group a poster, like a piece of chart paper, and I have them just tell me, or they write down their conclusion on there. They maybe draw a graph if they have a graph or anything like that, or they can even do it on if they want to do a PowerPoint, they can do a PowerPoint. And I give them 5 minutes, very short presentations. So I have 8 groups. It takes 40 minutes, 50-minute class period. So it takes one whole class period for them all to present their findings from their different labs. And it does take longer than traditional labs. Most of these labs take 3 days, 3 class periods. That is, for me, they're 50-minute class periods to accomplish. So the first day we have them just design the lab and start collecting data. The second day they analyze the data and make their conclusion. And then the third day we do the presentations. So it can take a long time to do this. And if you're running short on time, like I said earlier, I don't do every single lab this way. Feel free to go back and do one of those traditional labs where they just follow the guidelines and you can get it, or they follow the procedure, because you can get it done faster that way. But I think that them learning how to design a lab is more important than me saving time to give another lecture or to do some book work, I feel like them creating and designing an experiment is more important than just, getting that, learning about that historical figure or that something like that. Because if we're trying to teach them to be real scientists, they need to be able to learn how real scientists make experiments and explore. So before I have them design their first experiment, I give them some guidelines. We talk about what makes a good experiment. For example, we talk about the scientific method, and there's different variations of the scientific method. The one I use is that they have to have a goal. They have background knowledge that I'd like them to tell me what they know already about the subject. I'd like them to give me a hypothesis, some data that is organized, analysis, and the conclusion. And I want it to be organized because it makes it easier for other students to review and follow what they did, but also makes it easier for me to grade, of course, I ask them to be careful in what they say. I say that you should measure your words, only say what you can prove, because I want their conclusions to be based on physical data, not based off of what they wanted to happen. So I asked them to avoid their biases and know that interfere with the experiment. And again, going back to why this is important is, here's a quote from Carl Sagan: "The method of science, as stodgy and grumpy as it may seem, is far more important than the findings of science." If you teach the students to be scientists and to follow the scientific method, this sets them up for critical thinking and learning for the rest of their lives. They learn how to find out things for themselves. You're not going to be there to educate them on everything for the rest of their life. They need to know how to find out stuff on their own. And maybe they can be a great scientist someday, but anyone could use this method to explore and learn in any background or not anything. I mean, look at the world today. A lot of people don't understand science. They don't know how to find out information for themselves. They don't know how to check information for themselves. You know, we need to have students understand that they can find out knowledge on their own by following the scientific method, and they can be unbiased and make conclusions based on physical data. And that's important for lawyers, cops, anybody, you know. So throughout the year, you need to give continual feedback on this. If you don't stay on this, they will just go back to the old way of doing labs that they've been doing for, 11 years if they got seniors, or, their entire science career from elementary school to middle school, they've been doing labs just where they just follow the guidelines, follow the procedure. You have to keep giving feedback on this and keep hammering it in to keep them going on this throughout the year, and keep giving that positive encouragement that you want them to create and explore and seek out new things. And that's all I have to say on that. These are my 3 kids, and they are all here being scientists because all kids of all ages can be scientists. And I'm a scientist too. I'm still learning and growing. I think that's what science is really about, is exploring and being creative. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chad. We have a couple of hands that have been raised. So Terry has been waiting patiently with a question. A lot of applauses from everybody. Great. So Terry, go ahead.
Thanks. So Chad literally teaches in the room next door to mine.
Yep.
And so I have to say, first of all, I love getting to see the poster presentations on his walls all of the time. That it looks great. It makes me feel like I'm slacking, and it always looks awesome. With my Physics 1 kids, the not AP kids, the not honors kids, the kids that are in my everyday physics class, probably the phrase they get tired of hearing me say is that the difference between you just playing around and you doing science is in science we write things down. And if I can get them to start doing that, then I feel like we're getting them closer a little bit to being traditional scientists. We had somebody talk earlier about English language learners and students that have trouble with learning. And I've had coaching from our language learner teachers and from our teachers who are in every variety of special ed. And they watched me run a lab like his, where we sort of let them struggle a little bit, and got told that they felt like they expected to see me jump in and stop the struggle. And after watching the whole period, they understood why we were willing to let them struggle and why it had value. So if you have someone that's only watching you for like 5 minutes, they might not get it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you got to have that conversation with your admin and with the other people at your school. And like I was saying, you got to make it clear to your students also. And it takes time to get your students used to it also. You have to like kind of train them on this throughout the year. So this isn't like you're not going to do this with one lab and it's going to work great. You can't just like shove them out the door and be like, go be scientists. You got to build them up to that, and it does take a little bit of practice because they're not used to that in a lot of their other classes.
I agree, and you did a great job, brother.
Thank you. And Mr. Barchfeld is my mentor, and in fact, I still call him Mr. Barchfeld instead of Terry, even though we're like coworkers. But
Right. So Eric, did I see your hand up? And then after that, I see Nikolai has raised his hand, so I will get to you. Yes, Eric.
No, I was.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Nikolai, your question, please.
Yes, chat.
Hello.
You used lab design. I'm sure that it works well because my engineering design that I implemented and thought about it yesterday, I know that works. But I want to know what kind of report you make from your labs. How you formulate reports. For example, first time when I make students make reports, they offer me from this flying paper to this tree paper with title, with sketch. One moment. With sketch and with table of results. On the second experiment, already 22% of students have these good reports. How do you make reports? This is my question.
Well, I think the best thing you can do is you have to give students continual feedback on what you want for your report. I think that like if you look at real scientific papers, every scientist has like their own way of structuring their papers, but a lot of them have very similar layouts and that sort of thing. So just give your students feedback on what you're looking for, especially at the beginning of the year, and then they're more likely to do their reports the way you want them to throughout the year. And yeah, I actually.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, that's it. I just saw another question in the chat. I was gonna.
Yes, I think we're on the same page. This is Soma's question.
Soma's question. Okay, yeah. So for suggestions for students performing online lab activities, I actually, especially when the whole COVID-19 thing started, I had to do a lot of online labs, and I used a variety of simulators that I found online at fet.colorado.edu, as well as physicsclassroom.com, and there's another webpage called ophysics.com. I used a bunch of these different online labs. Are you going to type them in for me? Anyway, for those ones, what I had them do was normally we do the presentations on posters, but instead of having to do the presentations on posters, I had them it was not as open of a lab because there's not as much they can do with a simulator, right? So they're going to have to follow a more strict procedure when it comes to simulators, because a lot of simulators can't do everything you might want them to be able to explore in that sort of situation. But when we had to do the presentations, I had them do it through Google Docs and Google Drive, so they were all able to collaborate on one like sheet to submit to me, so I could see their work that they did together. And you know, that's does that answer your question, Soma?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do we have other questions from participants who haven't had a chance to speak yet?
Yes. Yeah, that's right, Deanna. I saw that. Thank you.
Brock, is your hand up?
No, my hand's not up. I don't know how that happened.
Matthew?
Hi, I'm Matt Reicher from New Jersey. It's my second year teaching, career changer. So I'm wondering, when I'm structuring my labs, it seems to me like there's general lab skills that need to be scaffolded and built throughout the year versus specific things like, are we learning how to measure velocity or kinematics? You mentioned how to write a procedure, how to create a data table, maybe error analysis, best fit lines. You can't do it all at once.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you or somebody has a reasonably ordered list, where do you start? And I guess it would vary if you have an honors or an AP or a conceptual class, but which one do you fold into the first lab? Which one do you fold into a following lab? So that by the end of the year, you can have built all these skills and not just, I find myself saying, here, do a line of best fit, hoping they learned it in their chemistry class and they have no idea what they're doing with it, even if they did learn it in their chemistry class prior to physics.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's one of the things that like I said, I'm still working on this and trying to figure out what the best way to do this all is. And I'm not even sure what is the best way to do it. But the way I do it is I start by just having them make a procedure for, there was a Dr. Malcolm Butler at University of Central Florida. He was my, another one of my mentors, and he does a lab he taught me this, that he does a lab where they have like a puzzle cube that the students have to solve. And the only way to solve it is by taking observations and collecting data on the cube and then using those patterns on the cube to figure out what the answer is to the puzzle. And so it's not really a science experiment, but if you think about it, it does have a lot of it's a scientific method can be used to solve it. Like they're taking observations, they're analyzing those observations to find patterns, and then they're using those patterns to make a prediction or a conclusion on what they think is or what the answer is to the, and that's like what we do in science. We look for patterns in nature, right? And so I think that I start there with that. That's my first lab of the year, is where I have them make a procedure and kind of construct their own experiment around this cube. And I tell them, I want you to tell me what steps you're going to take to solve this puzzle, right? So that's just focused on learning how to write a procedure for anything. And it doesn't need to be, and there's no measuring involved there like you traditionally think of in a lab. Like there's no meter sticks or graphing. So it's all, so I think it's a good place to start for procedure. And then the next lab I do is a toy car that moves at a constant speed. And then the focus of that lab is to teach them how to do a line of best fit and graphing, like you said. And also they can start learning about velocity at the same time. And I'd actually do, yeah, I see some people do very few labs. I do almost one lab every 2 weeks. So I do a lot of labs in my class, and they're not all big labs. Sometimes they're just like more like an activity, they're shorter. Does that answer your question, Matthew?
Well, yes, it was a good start. So what you told me is your first lab, you have them learn how to write a procedure and you give them feedback and hopefully they gain some skills. Your second lab, you're going to do a line of best fit and have them learn that particular skill. And then I presume you have more as you go on, and maybe you're still working through that.
And then the labs are, I design them in a way where I give them like I give them a little bit of more help each time, or at the beginning than I do at the end. So that way throughout the year, they're kind of doing more of it themselves.
You give them more help each time or less help each time?
I meant the opposite. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I mean, like, as far as procedure goes.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great question. Our next question comes from Deanna.
Thank you. I love the idea of kids coming up with their own procedure, and I've tried it myself. The part that I've always struggled with is really like presenting what I like want them to do. Is it like, how do you typically do that? Do you present it as a problem? Do you say this is what we need to figure out? Just so that they know where to go with their procedure. Just that beginning part is the part that I've always kind of struggled with.
Yeah, I start off by presenting the question that we want to answer, or like the goal of our lab. So that way they all have the same goal, and that helps to keep them from going too far off base from what I want them to look at. And also there's certain things that they might bring me this idea that like, I want to do this. And I'm like, okay, that's a great idea, but I don't have, a nuclear reactor or anything like that. So we don't have the equipment for that. I was like, so this is the equipment you have, and you have to make a lab with this equipment. Okay. And I think that also helps to keep them from going too far off bases. They're limited by the equipment available to them, you know? So you want to talk about what they can do with that equipment and kind of explain how the equipment works. And then they have to make up a lab to go with it. And that those two things, the goal and the equipment limit, kind of makes it so they can still explore a bit, but they can't just go way off of what your topic of the lesson is.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Chad? We have time probably for one more. I see no hands raised, but I'll give you a few more.
I have a question. I just don't see how to raise my hand in the reactions.
I see you, John. Go ahead.
All I have are applause and thumbs up.
I don't mind either of those.
Okay. So my question is, I've also done experimenting with experiments. And one problem that I frequently run into, and I just want your feedback because I have my own solutions, but what do you do when you have a group that's just sitting there and when you ask them, what are they doing? They say, we don't know. Why, what are we trying to investigate? We don't know. You know, just blank.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I want to avoid leading them down the garden path because they're basically trying to get me to do the lab and the thinking for them.
Right, and you want them, and the whole goal is that they're going to be thinkers.
Yes, exactly.
So I'll tell you, like I said, I'm not an expert on this, but what I do currently is I try to guide them with a question. Like I try to do the Socratic method, you know, sort of like give them a question to think about instead of just telling them, okay, do this. But the question is sort of like, you know, pointing them in the right direction. It's a, you know, it's a pointing question to help them get moving on something at least, you know. I'm like, so, okay, if you don't know what to do, what do you know how to measure is a good place to start. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you measure that? Since you know how to measure that thing that you do know how to get. And then maybe think of what you can do next after you get that done. So at least they get moving a little bit and get something done. But that's what I do currently. I don't know. What do you do? Because I am curious to hear your.
Pretty much the same thing. I was hoping that since you're the speaker here, maybe you had some magic tricks that I hadn't thought of or heard of yet. But it sounds like we do the same as
Like I said, I'm not an expert. I don't know. I'm just another one of you guys.
Just your average Joe.
There you go. But hey, thank you for your question.
Great, so that concludes your Q&A session for Chad. Again, you can continue the discussion on Slack. Before we move on to our next speaker, there have been enough inquiries about how to raise your hand. So what we're gonna do right now is just take a minute to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you, John, for letting us know that was not obvious. So everybody, we're gonna go ahead and try this, and I want to see all the raised hands on my participant chat box. So here are the instructions. Under the main Zoom window, you will see an icon that says participants. When you click participants, a screen should come up on your right where you will actually see the list of participants. You will have a number of options to raise your hand, including raise your hand right below that list. And I see almost everybody's raised their hands. All the hands are coming up. Remember that we have over 100 participants, so it's very difficult if you're physically raising your hand. As much as we want to get to everybody, it's very difficult for one person to see everybody. So this is the best way, because what happens once you raise your hand here using this tool is it will bump.
You may want to point out that it's at the bottom left of the participant list.
Bottom left of the participant list. Okay, we have about 80% with hands up.
It could be confused with the thumbs up, the thumbs down, and the applause.
Sure, yeah, those are other options as well. Really great point, Matt. So as Matt mentioned, it could be confused with the other options, thumbs up, thumbs down, applause. Thank you for that. All right, our goal with this is to make sure that everybody who has a question has an opportunity to go ahead and be put on the queue so that we can go ahead and address them. All right, so we're gonna put all the hands down in a minute. And with that, we are going to transition to our last speaker for the day. But I do have an announcement, even though it's not on the schedule. At the end of this talk, we want to check in with you and just have a discussion about how things are going. So I know that some of you, well, I know all of you are very busy, but if you can stick around for that, that would be very beneficial, but we'll give you more information about that once our next talk is over. So next, I'm very excited to hear from Maksuda Frost from Chavez High School in Houston. Maksuda will be talking about the value in the what ifs.
I'd like to start off by thanking the organizing committee for giving me a chance to present to these wonderful and talented physics educators from across the globe at this virtual workshop. I cannot imagine that was an easy task to achieve under these unprecedented circumstances. I would also like to thank the educators themselves for their presence, which truly shows dedication to want to take physics education to the next level and do whatever it takes, even if it means adjusting to time zones, pandemics, etc. I'm Dr. Afroz, and I am a physics teacher at Chavez High School in Houston. My classes always start out in the same way, with a bunch of students terrified with physics, the mathematics behind it, and its cut and dry nature. I started thinking about what can be done to change this. How can the students own physics and feel engaged with the content material, as well as its connection to the real and imaginative world? My research led me to dig deeper into the pedagogy of effective questioning as an option to solve this problem. Today's presentation is a brief look at one of these strategies of effective questioning. Welcome to the power of what ifs. Imagine if these questions were not asked. Where would that leave our understanding of not only our Earth, but our universe? Because great minds dared to ask what if, we no longer think of the Earth as flat and also have Einstein's theory of relativity. Today's talk will focus more so on how these what if questions can greatly enhance student engagement as compared to using them for scientific content knowledge only. It does not even require expensive live equipment. There's a brief recap of what student engagement is and looks like, after which strategies will be discussed for the different types of engagement, some of which may be surprising. It will then continue with defining what are what if questions, their benefits, use in different aspects of academia, and how it alters slightly. At the end, there will be a case study showing the differences of what if-based questionings make to authentic student learning. So when we say student engagement, what is it really referring to? It is not necessarily the compliant student who turns in all her work, nor is it the quiet student who wanders off into his own world while appearing to be attentive towards what the teacher is saying. It is when students truly connect to the content and interact with it to internalize it in their own lives. We have all come across the four basic types of students: the non-engaged, the passively engaged, the semi-engaged, and the highly engaged. The non-engaged, of course, often being asleep. If we take a closer look at the actively engaged students, we will notice they are always asking questions and trying to answer them. They do not know and they want to know more and learn. A simple conclusion that can be drawn from this is that good questions from both the teacher and students mean more engagement. Strategies. Though there are many aspects and strategies out there about engagement, I want to emphasize on three distinct categories and ways they can be implemented in classrooms: behavioral engagement, content engagement, and cognitive engagement. This is really the level we want our students to be at. One of the best practices to use for behavioral engagement is have procedures and policies in place in classrooms. I know we often look at these as just classroom tools, but they really are much more. When students walk in a classroom with clearly set expectations and carefully thought out procedures put in place, they're likely to be more engaged in the lesson itself as if there was no space for confusion. How do I go to the restroom? Where do I put my papers? Am I supposed to ask the teacher for raise my hand, etc.? Though these things seem very trivial, they all add up. A well thought out classroom management strategy creates a welcoming and caring environment for the students, setting up the foundation for where the magic happens, hence allowing the students to be more engaged. It is more important to note here that just putting down rules for students is not what is meant by creating a classroom management plan that is well thought out. The second one is content engagement, where the students are interacting with the content only. This can be done through hands-on learning experiments, traditional lectures, practice problems, etc. It is, of course, very important for students to engage with the content and know it, but that is really all content engagement does. Allow students to know the content and not understand it. There is a big distinction between knowledge and understanding. The last type of engagement we're going to talk about in this section is cognitive engagement, which incorporates both behavioral and content engagement and adds up to understanding and conceptualizing the piece of it. Students now not only know the content, they understand it, can relate to it in a more generic way. This is where we want our students' engagements to be at whenever possible. Some strategies that lead this are UDL, project-based learning, collaboration, and also effective questioning in this case. What-if questions. It has been shown that what-if questions help build critical thinking skills, confidence in communication, imagination, and hooks that catch the students' attention. Let's now get right into it. What are what-if questions? According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, a what-if question is one that asks someone to imagine what might happen or might have happened. They differ from other effective questions because most effective questions stick to how and why questions about your knowledge and depth. Even open-ended effective questions can often be about analysis of actual situations, whereas what-if questions entice and unlock the imaginative part of the brain. It forces one to dig deeper. The sky really is the limit with such questioning. Let's talk a little bit about its effectiveness. What-if questions effectively push the boundaries of our understanding? They allow us to explore new ways of looking at old theories. They are considered the beginning point of scientific method and ways of thinking and reasoning. What-if questions are the cornerstone of progress in civilization and science. But putting aside the larger impact it has on human accomplishments as a whole, we can also see its effectiveness in student success and engagement. We will discuss this in further detail later. But before we do that, I'd like to show the subtle differences of what-if questions in different branches of academia. Let's start off with what-if in science. They are interlinked with thought experiments. The biggest use of what-if questions in science is its ability to allow scientists to isolate the physical phenomena or concept that they want to study or create a scenario revolving around it. In physics, free body diagrams are a classic example of that. Essentially, we are saying that we could isolate this body from everything else and look at only the forces acting on it. What would it look like? They often have answers which are empirically provable. We call this as hypothesis. They allow us to access the risks involved in creating an experiment before we actually conduct it or build it. A famous example of this is, of course, Galileo's thought experiment. Another could be Newton's gravitational law experiment. Let's look at what it does in philosophy. What-ifs in philosophy are slightly different than in sciences. They are rarely empirical in nature and target aspects of morality, ethics, epistemology, etc. They ask what we should do and what would happen if we did that. The trolley problem is a classic example of that. What-if questions rarely get converted to real-life experiments because oftentimes lives are at stake. And they do it, and when it does happen, it moves from the field of philosophy into psychology. Now let's get back to what-if and student engagement. Students are used to walking into a science classroom and being told factual things. Some of them are very interesting, others not so much. The sky is blue, the sun rises in the east, the momentum of objects are conserved, etc. They are used to seeing a formula and learning how to apply it. Also, because a teacher said something, they will believe it and take it on face value. What if questions challenge the core of what learning looks like to them? They are metacognitive questions that force the students to reflect and rely on their understanding of the knowledge and concepts instead of what the teacher says. This has shown to be very effective in terms of retaining and internalizing information. Here's an example of what if creation depth. What direction does the sun rise in? Why does it rise in that direction? The first question is a simple fact. The second one requires you to dig a little deeper and think about the reasoning behind that fact. Now let's look at this question. What if there was no sun and only the moon and stars were left? What direction would the star and moon rise in then? Does the object have any say in the direction of rising? Does the sun make a difference whether it's present or not? We see how as soon as we're asking these questions, students now have to think about not only why it rotates, but also whether other objects' presence makes a difference to its rotation. Hence, they are digging much deeper in their level of knowledge. Now, I would like to take a look at a case study. Case 1. Teacher, state Newton's law, please, and tell me what it means. Student states the first law and explains by repeating the following. It means an object will stay where it is and keep on moving unless a force is applied. Can someone explain that further and also tell me what makes the first law very interesting? Students are quiet, some mumble. Maybe the fact you need a force to move things, etc. Case 2. We have the same scenario at the beginning, where the teacher asks for the student Newton's law. The student stated, here's where it gets different. Teacher, there is something very interesting in the first law that needs our attention. What if you could take yourself into a void or a complete white room where there is no sense of up, down, left, right, or front and back? Would you know whether you're moving or not? Student 1, yes, because I'm going forward. Another student might ask us, but how would you know? Student 2, yes, because I can see things in the pass by. But what would you see pass by? Student 3, no, because there is no reference. Aha, that is the aha moment we often want. Teachers, so we can see that a fundamental part of the first law is the understanding that rest and constant motion cannot be differentiated. What if I let you throw your shoe? What would happen now and why? We would know something is moving because we can see ourselves relative to the shoe. Something has been removed, pushing us forward. What if I slowly take off the shoe, etc.? We see from these two questions that in the first case, because there was no what ifs involved, students had no idea of what they were saying. Whereas in the second case, it was the students slowly but steadily starting to make their own questions in the first place. There was mumbling, there was almost no ownership of the learning because they could not create their own situation. In the second case, because they were allowed to use their imagination, they started arguing among themselves and they gave reasons as to why things happened. It made the class more fun, more engaging, and also more about the student-centeredness than the teacher teaching themselves. And I think this is the real beauty of what if questions. You can lay the ownership onto the students. In the last category of engagement, which is fairly recent, which is not on the previous slide, this is called agentic engagement. In agentic engagement, the student shows intentionality in learning, gathering knowledge, and is bearing on their life choices and circumstances. It is when the student starts asking what if questions themselves instead of the teacher and dictates the learning environment. All of this has been talked about only what if questions in thought. How do they relate to real life experiments? What if questions do not only have to stay in the imaginative world, they can be transformed into real life experiments to demonstrate physical relations and phenomena. This is really the question part of the scientific method from where all stems. A well thought out question is the key to good scientific experiment. But not only that, it allows us to navigate from one world to the other. They bring cutting edge technology to our doorsteps, both in classrooms and outside. I always encourage my students to first think about what it is they want to answer, how would they answer it, and then start the execution. This can be seen in some of the photos of the experiments from my class. Once again, I believe in using minimally expensive resources because ours is a Title I school. In the first image, it is classic, building bridges out of popsicle sticks. But the question wasn't, can you build bridges out of popsicle sticks and hold so much weight, but rather, what if you were allowed to design a bridge to your own liking using popsicle sticks and glue? How much weight do you think it would hold? Why? What if we were to distribute the books differently? Would that matter? If you were given the choice of objects to test the stress of the bridge, what would you choose and why? In the second setup, the students will challenge to create a Rube Goldberg's machine. But once again, it wasn't just creating the machine and calculating the energy conservation. It was much more. It started off with creating a simple machine in groups of 4 students. Then one student asked, what if we could combine multiple groups machines together? Would it work? The next question was, what if we could combine all group machines together? Would that work? In order to encourage them at this moment, I of course gave them grades incentive, because by this time I too was curious. What if we could combine 10 machines in a group? What would that look like? This not only piqued the interest of the students, it piqued my interest too. I have really rarely seen such student engagement and collaboration as this time. I was skeptical at first, but as the weeks went by and more students were staying late after school, not wanting to go home until they figured out if this was possible at all. Needless to say, they made it happen. And not only make the machine work, they calculated the energies needed, where and how the transfers would be needed to do, etc. All of this happened simply because a student dared to ask what if. In conclusion, I would like to say that student engagement is the key to more meaningful and authentic learning. It is not the content we teach that matters, but what we teach and how we teach it. It is the content in today's day is available at our fingertips of all students. So as educators, our responsibility is to create connection between the content and the students, invoke emotional reactions to the material at hand. We want the students to become agents of their own learning and lead the class not passively, but actually participate as leaders. What if questions have the ability to do that and much more? They have the ability to transform boring classes into engaging, fun classes. More often than not, by the end of the course, my students not only do not find physics boring, they are empowered and in fact want to do a class career in science. With that, I would like to once again thank the organizers and everybody for listening to what I have to say. Thank you very much, and I hope our question and answer session will be fun. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very thought-provoking and also a favorite topic of mine. Again, all the questions, please go ahead and raise your hand. If you're having difficulties with the Zoom hand, you can also message me privately or message the chat room. So at this time, we will be taking questions. Terry, go ahead.
I love your notion of making sure that they get in the habit of asking what if. I'm wondering if you, do you specifically have like what if day as sort of a summative event at say the end of a section?
No. So for my class, it actually starts with what ifs. I go the other way around. Like
Okay.
I would start, like Ellen saying, if I'm doing Newton's laws, I would start off with just simply, okay, what do you know? And we've all been there, right? When you ask them to reiterate, they'll just say the same thing over and over again. It stays the way it is. And then from, depending on the questions I get or the answers I get from these students, goes the what if questions. I'll have a bunch ready, like, okay, this is the direction I want them to start thinking in at the beginning of the lecture. And then the rest of the lecture just follows from there, depending on the depth that the students continue on.
And I think you hit on a critical thing, which is having a sequence of it all sort of laid out ahead of time so that it's not just you trying to invent it on the spot.
It matters, right? Because, and I think the idea of that is not all students will have the same depth level, right? Just like with art, we don't expect everybody to become a, brilliant artist, but we do want them to actually improve. So if someone starts at A, we want them to be able to get to the G.
If someone's already at the G level, we want them to do the whole alphabet sooner or later, right? So that's what the what ifs questions for me helps with. Like I can take them to a deeper level than where they already are and just keep on pushing those boundaries. And then it becomes just a student each serving themselves, right? So that's my really big goal, like making sure that everybody just goes to the next level that they can get to.
They can reach.
Exactly.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Yes, excellent point. I have a question here from the chat that I think would be of interest to everybody. Diana wants to know if anybody has a resource for what if questions. Do you know of a question bank or something that we could use, Maksuda?
I don't actually have a resource. Yeah. It's been over the years, I've been trying to compile them myself. Like for example, one of my AP trainings I did, I loved the question that trainer had asked, like, what if we would take everybody from the earth and put them onto the Great Wall of China? So that became one of my questions I pick up. So as I go to different sessions, I kind of like compile them in my own bank. I have not yet found one, but there must be out there, right? I can look for it and try to put it in later.
Michael?
Yeah, there's actually a whole bunch of what if scenarios in spreadsheet modeling and spreadsheet lab manual. Because you can basically just take the existing model, and then that's really the basis behind making experiments, is you just ask new questions. So what if I do this? What if I do that? And that ability to ask those questions and kind of change the numbers out very quickly and look at a whole new situation with a realistic model. That's kind of the what if is what lets you go in any direction. So some of the videos that I have out, I'm going to send out, I have a couple commercial workshops coming up through the AAPT remote meeting. That's the 19th through the 22nd. And one of the things I wanted to do with this group is to share the Word document that has all the workshops that are on there, because some of the pedagogical approaches for the spreadsheet modeling and how the professional development is done is you can ask a what if question like that and then write it up and save it and save the accompanying spreadsheet and then share that idea. And then other educators can access it who have access to the spreadsheet lab manual. So just the concept of being able to save that experience and that thought process is how educators can see what other educators are doing with their students and almost directly share that in a way that you would otherwise have to drive to their school and sit in their classroom. We did a hashtag Observe Me my last year at St. Vincent High School, and it was just a question of picking a period to go sit in somebody else's room and just watch what they do. I think with remote learning, that opportunity is there for everyone. So satisfying around organization and themes, trying to get everything organized together. That's why I have like a standardized kind of file credentialing system, so everything can stay organized. Files have suffixes on them and everything, but what if questions are great because that's what kids naturally do. Every time you start talking about it, they're all thinking, what if this, what if that? And that's really where you're taking advantage of that curiosity that the kids have. And if you have a spreadsheet model that can give these answers, you're learning in class with them. And I've been surprised by models that I've written, and I've learned things from models that I've written and sort of improved my own fluency after thinking like, okay, this will get the job done. And then I'd be like, wow, I didn't realize that I could do that with that thing that I have. Because it's kind of like you're coding a phenomenon onto a spreadsheet, and then you can study that. And that's really how humans think of science. They formulate models in their head, and then how things behave based on those models is how they get their answer.
I like what you said, like with the what if questions. Ultimately, all my what if questions in a day might end with no answer, right? Or I won't know the answer, because if you know the answer, it kind of beats the whole purpose of curiosity. Yeah. Like one of the questions we ended up with was like, if you were to take your helmet off in space, what would happen to your body? Of course, students are like, you'll die, you'll this, you'll that. They all say all that. And then a student was like, okay, but we know that we've got the nose and everything, which is upper body, which allows us to breathe. But what would happen if I took off a shoe, right? Would the same level of pressure happen? Or what would happen if I just took off a little just piece of cloth? So what if questions do need to end with you not knowing the answer. At least that's my preference, because it forces the kids to go home and still think about it. And they will go into looking for answers their own way and come back either with the answer or like, what was the answer to yesterday's question? Of course, more often than I don't give the answer, but I mean, that's just the way and I definitely like the idea of like putting it into a spreadsheet because it's also more systematic that way. You can actually see what's going on.
Yeah, the gravitation one that I have, they can do Schwarzschild radius. So it's like, what if we wanted to turn the Earth into a black hole? And then you can use goal seek, which is under what if analysis in Excel, and it'll change the radius around until you have the escape velocity at the speed of light, which are the constraints you set. So by asking the right questions, I find that there's also if functions on Excel that have a value of true and value of false. And those functions are really powerful for modeling as well. I mean, something like a direction change on a spreadsheet is really easy to model if you have an if-then statement. So what ifs are a tremendous part of computer science, and really nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I mean, if possible, I mean, if nobody has any questions, I could do a share. I could share my screen and show what I was talking about with the Schwarzschild radius if people are curious on a gravitation model. If there's not time, don't worry about it. But
we are running a little bit late on
questions.
time. Yeah, we're running late on time. I do wonder if you could post this on Slack.
Oh yeah, I'll post it on Slack. I have the whole workshop all automated down to one Word document. So
yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I'll just do that then.
Thank you. All right. If there are no other questions, right now what we want to do, we want to have a check-in about how our workshop is going. It's Wednesday. We were running a little bit late. I want to recognize a name that we skipped right through our breaks. I know everybody's busy and we want to be respectful of time. So to get your feedback, we want to do this in a couple of ways so that people can engage in this discussion productively. Some of us are more comfortable speaking into the whole group, into a camera. Other of us, like me personally, I need a little bit more time to formulate my thoughts. So I'm going to post some questions, and if you feel comfortable, please share your thoughts, and we hope this is a productive discussion. But if this is something that you would rather do in writing, I'm going to share a brief Google form with you in the chat that you can link to. But essentially what we want to know is we want to take the pulse. We want to figure out what you've enjoyed so far, what has worked, what could be improved either in terms of facilitation, instructions in the morning, links. We talked about cognitive load with our students, and we're cognizant that as students ourselves, the clearer the map and how our day is going to go, the better we'll be able to pay attention to the content that we really care about. So what are you most looking forward to? That's another question. And finally, what do you hope to gain after the workshop is over? We have received a lot of awesome questions, namely about the network going on. I'm so excited about that, but the reality is that we don't know what shape it's going to take right now, because something I've heard is, a network of teachers by teachers.
Can I interrupt you just a second?
Of course, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of people cannot access it. I think it's set to only our domain. We should just say anybody with the link can edit.
I will do that.
If you can change the permission. Sorry for the interruption.
I will do that right now. So while I'm doing that, and Eric, if you wouldn't mind while I'm changing the permissions, I guess the first question is, what have you enjoyed so far? Are there any thoughts? And I will go ahead and change the permission settings.
I'm sorry, Eric. I'm sorry, Isa. What you mentioned my name, Eric. What do you want me to do? I'm creating the poster session room, so I was.
I'm back. So
Okay.
I'm back, so no worries, thank you. Everybody should now have access to that Google form if you want to go ahead and use that instead of having a discussion here, or if you need more time to process. I see that Donna Jones has her hand up. Donna, please go ahead.
All right. I really appreciate the sense of community among the physics teachers, which sounds really bizarre since we are all remote and working from home, but you have been able to formulate a sense of community, at least, I mean, I feel that you have, and just the vast wealth of knowledge and experience that the participants bring to the table. And it's been very helpful, not only the presenters, but the discussions and the chats. It's been really, really good. It's going to take a while to even process all the information.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. I'm right on board. I know one of the things that struck me when I first started to learn about this community was how in individual schools, physics high school teachers can be so isolated. And that was something that was a surprise to me. So I agree with you and second your thought. Thank you so much. Next, we have Brock Baxter.
What I have to say is similar to Donna, but I'm at a small school, so I'm the only physics teacher. So I can't really have discussions with any other physics teachers at my school. And on top of that, I'm the only, and I guess I don't know this for sure, but I don't have the perception that there are very many other teachers at my school that do the inquiry thing. So not only am I the only physics teacher, but I feel like I'm the only modeling teacher that teaches in that way. So that's why I like this, because I never get to do this. I never get to talk with physics teachers, let alone I never get to talk with other modeling or inquiry-based teachers.
Thank you for that. That's a really great point, how there can be isolation in terms of content, but also isolation in terms of pedagogical practices and curriculum and philosophy even. I mean, so many of the things we've talked about cut really deep into our assumptions and beliefs about education, how people learn, and what our role is as educators. So I really appreciate that comment. Next, we have Miss Monte. Miss Monte, is that right?
All right, you said it right. All right, not too many people can get it right. I would say this whole experience has been amazing. Being new and being career changer. So I'm a career trainer because I'm coming from corporate America to teaching. So being able to network, oh my God, I think I connected with a lot of people because I've been sending private messages. I said I needed to connect with you. So it's really good to feel the warmth. And then when we're in our breakout, people have really beautiful, warm spirits. So it's really been a great experience because now I know I have about 10 new tools I can add to my toolkit. You know, a whole lot of different websites I can use with my children. It's really a great experience. And I just hope that the network keeps going. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Monte. It's been a pleasure connecting with you. The brief chances I've had too. So thank you. We really hope to make these next couple of days centered around community fostering and thinking about next steps in terms of, helping us process. There's a lot. I believe that Donna mentioned that it's going to take a little bit. I'm right there with you. So that's why the ongoing community is really important. So excellent. Next, we have Nicole. Nicole, go ahead.
Hi. I'd like to kind of second what both Brock and Ms. Monte said regarding kind of the community and getting to work with some other people. We have several physics teachers in our district and I get to work with them often, but they are heels dug in, old school. Physics is just supposed to be another math class. And it's really frustrating because, even though I guess if you can measure success as a physics teacher by scores, like my AP scores are much better. And I don't understand why I'm like trying to drag people along with me. And then I second guess myself. And it's been really nice to sit and listen to people talk and make me feel like the strategies that I've wanted to use, now I have someone else telling me how they've done it successfully, or the strategies that I have been using, like the experimental design stuff, especially that today. I'm frequently questioned as to whether or not that's something I should be doing in my classroom. And even learning catalytics, I'm trying to drag my school along with me, and there's just not a lot of takers. And so it's nice to be able to have conversations and listen to other people talk about the effectiveness of strategies that they're using that are things that I do in class also. Makes me feel like I should keep trying new things and keep at the stuff that's working for me. And so kind of getting me ready, like it's very motivational to start this, what I'm assuming is going to be an absolutely crazy year. But I've been searching for some motivation to get started next month, and I think that this will do it.
Thank you, Nicole. I won't elaborate on this, but I mean, something we haven't talked about explicitly, it's come up because we're all in this world, is what is going to happen to our classrooms in the fall. You know, there's so much uncertainty. And when we were planning this, we could not have anticipated that we were going to be in this situation. But I think that community building, the Slack channels, could be a really great place to address some of that uncertainty and share some of the dynamism or the dynamic teaching instruction that we are probably going to have to use in the fall. Next, we have Eileen.
Yes, I just wanted to also say what Ms. Monte said, which is the tools for me have been used, because a lot of times you as a new teacher, you hear all these great ideas and, oh yeah, I'm going to look into that and I'm going to do that. But to, you know, hear the ideas like for peer modeling and say, and here's the tools, and having people, you know, add in the chat like, oh, and here's tools I use. It just makes it like, oh, I can do this like now, you know, I don't have to like investigate and look into it. So, I mean, I just really like the instruction's been fabulous, but, you know, combining it with, and here's how you can do it has been what's so beneficial to me. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Next, we're gonna go to Michael. And then after this, if you still have more thoughts, please use that Google form. I would like to transition into challenges or things we could do better, or gaps that perhaps we could address tomorrow on Friday. But with that, Michael, go ahead.
Just making sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, I think this was an amazing workshop. It's the best of its type that I've ever been to. I don't know if that's what the Zoom meetings or faculty meetings were looking like, because I was out of the school this past year. But really, I mean, even though I'm kind of working in a business role through an NSF grant, like I've been a teacher all my life. I started right out of college, alternate route, and the whole concept of this type of network is something that I was hypothesizing, and it's exactly what I was funded to do, with the narrow focus of spreadsheet modeling, but then applied across all disciplines. So basically my job is going to be to continue to keep people organized and to sustain messaging and to keep the resources current and look for ways to leverage outcomes. And by leverage outcomes, I mean teachers sharing resources with other teachers. If you talk about what you do, but you don't have a deliverable for that teacher, it doesn't really help them that much. It creates work for them to try to reproduce it. So the fact that teachers have kind of like ready to deliver things to share, that's a really important thing in terms of are we going to see benefit in the classroom? But I can say with relative certainty that the vast majority of people that attended this conference have something in mind that they can directly use in class, that they're planning to directly use in class, and they know how much time it's going to take them, and they're looking forward to it. And for professional development, I've been saying for years now, if you don't have a student outcome related to your professional development, you're wasting that time. And that the professional development right now has to be fully about solving this remote education problem, and you know, computational modeling is a big part of that. That's what emptied our schools. I mean, people say the pandemic emptied the schools, but it was the predictive models that the leaders used, and in some cases used ineffectively, and with improper data, they made kind of fundamental inherent errors that you wouldn't make in experimentation. So, I mean, it really goes to show the importance of what physics teachers do, as far as just like, I think they're the leaders of STEM understanding and modeling in their schools and in their communities. So it's a great place to meet people for the sake of propagating those skills out to other departments, because physics teacher networks just seem to be the most cohesive and the most, more so than other networks. I've seen, like, for instance, Brock, he's the only physics teacher. This is his chance to collaborate with physics colleagues. The other 185 school days of the year, he's all by himself. And that's the case for a lot of people. That's how it was for me. I taught in a small school, and I talked to physics teachers who teach chemistry, biology, and they're doing all different subjects, all different levels, and they're just faced with an impossible task prior to the pandemic. Now that we have the pandemic and it has to be done remotely, it's even more impossible. And the fact that good people are working hard all summer is really inspiring to see this many people here, this attentive, and working on solving this problem of our time. So congratulations to everybody who's putting in the time, and thank you for organizing.
Thank you.
Well, I feel I should pitch in here, because I really think, yes, we may have organized it, but you are all contributing to it, and you can organize as much as you want. It's not until you get the people together that you have a community. So I'm really truly pleased. At the end, we'll have a discussion, on Friday before we close. We'll have a discussion, what the next steps are, how we want to turn this into a self-sustaining, continuing community. But if there are certain things you want out of this current meeting before Friday, I mean, now is perhaps a good time to briefly bring that up. If there's something you think, we should have a little bit more time here, or do a little bit more of this, or a little bit more of that. I mean, if things are fine, that's fine too, but I want to give an opportunity for everyone to say, well, hey, maybe we can do this, or maybe we can do that to make it even better. So back to you, Isa.
Yeah, Miss Monte, go ahead.
Yes, is it possible to create maybe a Facebook page? I mean, I'm not a Facebook person, but maybe a Facebook page for us, like our own group, maybe a LinkedIn. My social media is LinkedIn and Twitter. Is it possible to take these 120 some people and bam, put them in Twitter?
I just volunteered Isa to do that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Please get in line.
That question was ignored.
You have to raise your hand for.
Okay.
Raise your hand first, question. He cannot raise his hand because he's a co-host.
Oh, I know that. Thanks for that. We will definitely look into it. One of the things that I'm going to be working on is figuring out how to keep this network going and looking at the different technology platforms out there. So that's definitely, Creston wasn't kidding. That really is on my plate. So thank you for that. Maksuda, go ahead.
I'm good. That was my mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Michael?
For the file sharing for like our slide decks and everything, what's the preferred site on that? I know there's Congregate, there's Slack, there's you can probably share stuff through Zoom. Should they be posted on Slack, or?
They should be posted on Slack. Great question. Thank you for that. So some of you might be aware, particularly if you were presenters, that we requested your slides if you were willing to share those.
Yeah.
We are setting up folders on Google Drive. One of these folders includes the chat conversations on Zoom. So some of you know that you have the ability to download the Zoom chat. So you have a record of the questions and the resources. We've been doing that for all of the sessions as well. And those are being posted in Google Drive folder that should be accessible to all of you. If you have any trouble, Slack me. And then the slides are also being posted in a folder in Slack. If you go to Slack, that's what I'm using as the headquarters right now for all our documents. There is a channel called Announcements. In the morning, that's where I've been posting the links, since I know keeping track of all of this is difficult, even though Sarah has been amazing and she's been emailing everybody with the information. So under Announcements, we've been posting the links to those Google folders. So right now I would say Google folder, and then we can link that to Slack in the appropriate channel. And we can pin it on top so it's readily accessible.
Yeah, there's I was at a Cracker Barrel meeting with the NJAAPT just the other day. I think it's July 7th. And part of what everybody reached at that meeting is we need to have a unified file sharing thing, and we need to organize it. And Debbie Andres, she like set up a file. She got it organized and got ready to go. And I don't think she realized the workload that she was taking on when she did that. Yeah. But I would like to be able to work with you on that, because I have a whole file credentialing system all built into it. And it might even be easier for me to just open that up and for you to fill everything in around there, since there's like hundreds of files already in there sorted by subject area. Okay. To sort them in. So I mean, we could, if you're working on that and you're finding that there's a lot of information to process and you could use backup, let me know. I'm available.
Thank you. Let's take this conversation offline. I will definitely follow up with you. Very interested. Preston, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that the Facebook and the Slack would have different functions. We have another network that I fund called Physics of Living Systems, graduate student network, and we use both. And the Facebook is more social media, and I think that we can use that for getting together at different meetings to advertise and get more people to join. And the Slack is more like a work directory where we can have resources and things.
Yeah, I definitely think there's work that gets created by sharing in mass with lots of people, but if it's organized the right way and we find the right people that are willing to do it for free, like me, and like, well, I'm not doing it for free, but I have funding that covers my time.
But I will supply funding for that, so I don't think it should be a worry about it.
Yeah, I think, yeah, okay, good.
When I worked in Los Alamos, we had a saying that vision without funding is hallucination. So
that's a good one. That's really good.
We need to have proper funding for this to be sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that funding is not going to be very difficult to obtain because of the number of teachers participating and the amount of resources that I think are basically being vetted in real time right now.
Yeah. All right, so back to Eric's question about any thoughts about what you would like to get in the next couple of days, or if there are certain sessions, sections, resources that we could be using between now and then. Any thoughts about that? And again, if nothing comes to mind right now, you can go ahead and use the Google Forms link. John, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Yay, it worked. I put it in the comments, but I was really interested. I poked around in the perusal thing app about as far as helping flipping the classroom and getting students to read material. So I was hoping that maybe there could be some more time set aside for best practices on how to use that effectively. It looks like a really good tool. I'd like to get a little bit more of a walkthrough on that.
Great. Thank you that you're asking me that. First of all, I put in Slack and I pinned it a resource that has much more information than I could give. It's a 2-page or 1 page on peer instruction and the other page on perusal, including how to integrate it in the LMS and so on. But I am working as soon as I I finish this conference and the one that I'm running next week, which is a totally different one, I'm planning a I don't want to call it a webinar because I used to give webinars and then on perusal and on peer instruction. I realized this is the wrong thing to do. I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing to introduce tools to prevent lecturing. So the next one that I'm going to do is I'm actually model the use of both perusal and peer instruction. So there'll be a little bit of overlap with what I did today, but it will really take on a new dimension because instead of asking questions about rocks and boats and so on, I will actually be taking the questions that people leave on perusal to discuss online. So I'm planning on, I'm developing that, and I hope to have it up and running 2 weeks from now. So I will make sure that I email everyone here. Sarah and Isa, please remind me when that is up and running and when that's, and I'll schedule a few of them so that people can join at a time that's convenient to them.
Okay, you said you'd already created a channel on Slack. What?
There's a I put on Slack, I think it's session 7. Let me see. Okay. Session 7, yeah. I put a handout called Flipping Online Resource Document.
Okay.
So it has some links and to papers and videos and other things.
Okay.
And that might be able, that might get you started and tide you over until I have that, I don't know what to call it, webinar, online session, whatever it is. But it's definitely not a passive webinar.
All right, so we have time for one more question. The next person on our queue is Rob.
Hey, so the only question that I had, I can kind of summarize it, is I was wondering if we can get the kind of the, I don't want to say the demographic of people involved, but I guess it would be the demographic on kind of what everybody is teaching, and like if they're a new teacher, and I'm really curious, I'm giving a talk tomorrow, if we can just get a count of how many teachers are actually teaching isolated. A lot of the conversations that we've had, like you've said, are people saying they don't have other people to talk to. And it's just something I'm curious in, and I think it might be useful to take a look at who we're actually reaching out to. Because I think the mix of talks that we've had so far has been great. I think there's quite literally been a little something for everybody. But it might be useful for future talks to kind of narrow down what some people might want to see, or what people don't even know they might want or need. Because I know that I found quite a few things for myself that I'm like, I didn't even think that was an issue. And now I see like, hey, that's a big gap I can close.
Rob,
Rob, can I suggest something quick? Yeah. Sorry, Isa, can I? So maybe Rob, you could direct message us, Isa and me and Sarah and Karstan, if he wants to get involved too. Since you volunteered, Isa, maybe I can volunteer you too. And tell us what it is that you would like to know about the participants. Then one thing I could do as a quick thing tomorrow morning as we get started is have a Zoom poll, which will be completely anonymous, but then people can sort of say, I feel I'm teaching isolated, and have a Likert scale of so, and have maybe 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 questions that we do very quickly at the beginning of the day, and then share the results with everybody. Do you think that would be a good idea? If you think it is, think it over and then direct message us on Slack and we'll get it done. Isa, back to you.
I was going to suggest something very similar. Thanks, Eric. All right, so we are out of time. Thank you so much for another great day. Are there any final organizational comments, either Sarah or Eric, that you would like to include here?
No, I think we're good for tomorrow. Thanks.
I was setting up the poster room for tomorrow. Do we have any of the poster presenters?
Yes, we have Cecilia and Ken have agreed to join us over there to give it.
Okay, good. I actually already see somebody there. Wow.
Yeah, it's probably Ken. He was testing it.
Yep, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay,
Thanks, Ken.
good.
Sure.
Okay,
Thank you.
And we'll see
terrific.
you there, Cecilia.
I'll join
So,
you there,
looking
Ken.
forward to it. I'll be there too.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. You've been troopers today. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you, Isa.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
You're muted, Eric.
I'm muted here in Zoom because I'm talking to Ken in the poster session.
So we can end the YouTube live. Can you do that? You're the host now.
What do you want me to do?
Up in the left corner, there's the YouTube live feature. You can turn that off.
Okay.